Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Westerville City Schools Board of Education. We're delighted you have joined us tonight. This evening's agenda will be displayed on the screens in the front of the room. There will be one opportunity tonight to address the board this evening. Agenda item 3.1. There is a sign-up sheet located on the back table of the room, and each speaker will have 5 minutes to address the board. And a timer will be shown on the screen. And with that, Ms. Marshall, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Bell?
Here.
Mrs. Meyer?
Here.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Here.
Mrs. Altman?
Here.
Mrs. Davidson?
Here. Will you please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, for public comments, we have one speaker this evening. I'd like to welcome Peg Duffy.
Somehow it seems like after 30-some years or more, I'm more tired of coming to board meetings than you are of seeing me, but several comments tonight. I realize it's not on part of tonight's agenda for discussion, but I'd like to hear some comment on how we're looking toward the requirement for the coursework for students' interaction with law enforcement. I know some school districts have already incorporated something like this into a course for when you get out in the real world, learn how to do income tax, that kind of thing. The other comment, I think now, rather than come levy time, is the time to explain to the public why we're closing Longfellow, why we're not going to be using it for student use. I mean, I can't believe the comments I'm hearing from people about, wait a minute, we put all that money into that to make little kid-sized toilets, and now we're not going to be using it. Are we going to put money in it again to put big people-sized toilets in? If we want to expand, people remember that Longfellow was the original math and science magnet school. And think about these things. You know, the community remembers things, and they're muttering about it. That's the best I can say.
Thank you, Peg. 4.1, may I have a motion to suspend Robert's Rules of Order for item 5 work session?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes, thank you. And we're going to start tonight, looks like with the superintendent's presentation.
Thank you, President Davis, and members of the board. I'm not going to do a lot. I just want to kind of open this evening's work session, part 2 from 2 weeks ago, with just a few kind of overarching comments. So as we all know, last couple of years, I'm going to say couple because it's been 2, we've worked tirelessly as we address COVID and the pandemic and the effect it's had on us. And one of the major effects it had on us is it took us by surprise and kept us looking at day-to-day operations and how to manage the changes that were coming. And in a lot of ways, it took our eye off the ball on some of the things that we've been working on, that we've been excited about, that we saw as opportunities. And so as we begin kind of this post-COVID era, getting back to those efforts is really, really important. So I can tell you that this team is very excited about this evening, particularly following up from the last work session, because as we look at the initiatives we're talking about here, we see a lot of opportunity. We see a lot of opportunity to add value to the and improving the student experience. We see a lot of value in providing additional resources to our staff and students and more options for our families, which we think are all part of what we're looking at this evening. We see what we're talking about, although these get pretty granular and almost siloed, but when we look at them as a package and we look at what we're trying to do with our mission and vision, and most importantly, our portrait of a graduate, we see how these things align ourselves towards that path that you never finish on, but you're always striving to be, as we look at our portrait of a graduate and our mission and vision statement. And we think we've done a lot of homework, put our pencil to paper, particularly over the last 2 weeks, to make sure that what we're talking about here is aligned to our financial responsibilities, our financial realities of the district, and with an eye on future opportunities that may come as we know those financial circumstances can change, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. So we've planned around those pieces overall and look forward to sharing that with the board this evening. So just wanted to frame that this evening as we kick it off, and I'll turn it over to you, Ms. Davidson, to get us going on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Up first tonight, we're going to ask Nicole, Ms. Marshall, to share a financial report with us. And she shared it with us at the end of the last work session, but I think we were all a little tired, and it might be worth revisiting. And I will say that I spent a couple hours with her recently kind of going through it again, and I definitely had some surprises. Not surprises, but different takeaways. So, Ms. Marshall.
Thank you, President Davidson, members of the board. So this is what I have handed out to you is the same worksheet that we went over at the last work session at the end. So very briefly, we went over it. So I just want to kind of make sure that I'm explaining well and highlighting some things. So before we start with anything, though, you might want to make a note, big, bold across this. These are estimates, right? Definitely not actual numbers we expect. These are just estimates and what we have based on the best information we have available today. So if you look, starting at the top of the spreadsheet, we have fiscal year 2019 through fiscal year 2029 highlighted for this whole spreadsheet. And then I put a yellow highlighting for bond levies and expiring millage. So these are for our current bond issues that we have. We have an estimated 0.6 mils that the last payment we will make will be December of 2022 this year. So that millage will fall off for our taxpayers for collection in 2023. So this will be the last payment that we make in this year in 2022. And those run calendar year. And then we have another bond issue that's expiring. The last payment will be December 1st of 2027, and we're estimating that to be collecting around 2.5 mils at the time when that expires. For operating levy for current expenses, the millage estimates that I have here, so our voters approved a 5.9 mil operating levy. They actually approved it November of 2019. We didn't collect. We delayed collections by 1 year, so it actually didn't collect until fiscal year 21, but that's when our voters approved that. And then based on the November forecast that we presented to the board and the deficit spending that we were projecting in that forecast, I would estimate millage needed in that forecast to be between 5.9 mils and 8.9 mils for operating. So what this is meant to show is where we were based on the forecast in November. And if we assume that all of these things that we have on this spreadsheet weren't including in our estimates of the forecast, because we did have some estimates for new staff and things like that, which we'll talk about, then these estimates below that number would be additional amounts to that. So if we're estimating right now in fiscal year 25 a 5.9 to 8.9 mil levy, and again, it's very much an estimate, then when we look at the middle school redesign dollars, which adds 24 FTE estimate over 23, 24, and 26, then it would be an additional, in 25, it would be additional 0.36 mils that would be added to those estimates above. So that's what this is meant to show. And when we look at planning for levies and things like that, we look at the average of 3 years because we expect a levy to last us at least 3 years before we would have to go back to the voters. So as you can see, like in fiscal year 25, it's 0.36, and then in 26, it jumps up to 0.55 with the additional 8 FTE there. And then for all-day kindergarten, this shows the same addition of 13 FTE over 5 over 20 in 25, 4 in 26, and 4 in 27. it's offset because we have half-day kindergarten programs right now, so we would have a savings from the half-day, and we'd really only have to add 6.5 FTE is what it would net to. And then we show a cumulative amount for that, and then a millage amount tied to that. Now, this only includes salaries and benefits costs for staffing. It doesn't include any additional costs for programming. It's just salaries and benefits for staffing. And if we fully implemented all-day kindergarten 100%, we would no longer charge tuition. And so that's what you see in fiscal year 27. So this is if all-day kindergarten were fully implemented. We're estimating that we would be collecting around $1.4 million in tuition revenue for all-day kindergarten. So that estimated millage would be 0.4 mils that we would have to add to any levy ask. For expanding the magnet schools, this just projects one additional FTE for fiscal year 23, 24, 25, 26, and 27. And you can see how that would affect that. For technology, this has a cost for additional new devices plus 1 FTE. Now, this was based on an original projection that we did. I do think we're going to have some conversations tonight about some different planning that's going into that. So I think that will change, but that's what we went over at the last meeting. And then the mental health and wellness additions, a total of 5 FTE. So it's 2 new in fiscal year 24, 1 in 25, 1 in 26, and 1 in 27. And then you can see the additional with that. Just a reminder too, I think I skipped over expanding the magnets, we are projecting to need an additional 1.5 FTE for specials in fiscal year 25, we have 3 grade levels added in that strand. And so that's also in those numbers. So what we had in the forecast in November, let me back up a little bit. So we've seen growth in our district consistently, which we had always projected. I say always, but for the last couple of years, we have been projecting to add. I do an average estimate. What's the average cost of a teacher? What's the average cost of an administrator? What's the average cost of a classified staff member? And so we put in the forecast an average. We averaged that we would increase our certified teacher class FTE by 10 FTE each year. In November, we dropped that to 5 FTE based on our enrollment. So we've seen a decline in our enrollment since 2019. And so we changed that to 5 in November. So what we have in November's forecast for fiscal year 23, we had 5 certified FTE, the average cost of 5 certified teachers, and the average cost of 1.5 classified staff for growth. We also had average costs for 2 administrators for the new elementary school, 25 certified, which are 25 teachers, WEA positions, and 9 classified positions for our classified staff. And that's to open the new elementary school. So I know Scott Dorn and his team have gone through and they're working on staffing for the new elementary school. So we're going to update those numbers with the May forecast to be more accurate with where we expect to be for next year. But that's what's in this forecast. So we don't have, for the 5 FTE and the 1.5 classified FTE for growth, we don't have any specific positions identified for those. So I just want to make sure that that's clear to everybody. So back to what I was saying with this spreadsheet. What's in the forecast, which based on November's forecast and deficit spending that starts in fiscal year 23, we would expect to ask voters for an operating levy. And there's lots of variables that go into that, right? Lots of things that can change between now and then. We have a new biennium budget that will be in place. They're still updating the new funding formula that they have in place, all those things. But based on the deficit spending that was in the forecast in November, we were at 5.9 to 8.9 mils for fall of '24. And so that includes the 5 FTE and the 1.5 FTE for certified and classified staff. And then this is all of the things that we're talking about tonight that's on this spreadsheet. Does that make sense? Okay. Do you have any questions about that?
Not specifically about these numbers, and this may not be something that you know off the top of your head, or that, Mark, you might know. Do you recall roughly what was the amount that we cut from middle school during the last round of major cuts? Roughly.
Wow. Throwing out a number, Peg. Trying to think of the number of FTE and putting it, I want to say it was around $1 million.
That's kind of where my thinking was,
Yeah.
is, as I'm looking at all of this, and we're looking, in many ways, some of these pieces are restorations in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And as I look at what was taken away from middle school and the impact that had on our middle schools, then I am looking at where middle school can go to return and be better than where it was before those cuts.
Yeah, and some of those FTE, because of contractual language and riffing or bumping and things that we had to do, so those dollar amounts varied depending on who ended up getting moved to a new spot.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Thank you. That helps me interpret your information, Nicole.
Anybody else?
Just thinking one thing through here. So we typically have now a 5 FTE, right, and 1.5 that are built into the forecast. So I'm just using as sort of a proxy here, that happens to be the number under magnet. So that's approximately equivalent to 0.02 mils. I mean, is that,
So it's 5 in 1 year. So
Mhm.
5 for 1 year.
Mhm.
So it'd be 5 for '23, and then additional 5 for '24, and additional 5 for '25.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I'm just trying to use what's on this sheet here for me to like translate that into
So it
like,
would be-
the millage of that.
So
right?
the cumulative amount, once we get to 5
Full 5 filled
in
out, yep.
'27,
Got
so
it.
it would be about 0.15
0.15.
mils.
Okay, yep,
So 1 mil generates about $3 million for us.
okay, yeah, thanks.
Anybody else? And we can come back to this as we start talking about other things that might lead us to questions. Back to Nicole. So don't feel like you have to ask something now, but
I'll be here all night.
We hope not. I mean, like, we hope this
Well-
doesn't go all night, you know,
Yeah.
that's, yeah.
yeah. Okay. I'm not hearing any questions, so we'll move on to magnet schools. Barb Wallace and Paul Hopkins.
In the past 2 weeks since we met, we have been meeting with principals and we've been meeting with the staff of the magnet schools to discuss adding one strand of math and science to the program. Most of our agenda is to come in these 2 weeks. This is as far as we've gotten in conversations, and we are now in the process of gathering written feedback from teachers to see what they want. They're excited about addition. It had to happen this way, but one school was all for pulling off the Band-Aid and jumping right in and making all the moves, and the other school was the exact opposite way. Let's take it real slow. So we'll gather more feedback and see which way we go, but we are in the process of putting together, starting with a new first grade and possibly a first and second grade for next year. And then still to come, there's an idea of convening a magnet school program advisory committee to make recommendations regarding program monitoring for the demand, how it plays out. Program definition, maybe as we add the strand of math, science, and we put our cultures and arts together, refining a little bit what those programs look like. So having a committee with some people, teachers and parents on that committee to help us make that definition. I think that's basically where we are at this point.
Questions? I have lots. Yeah. So what would movement look like next year?
Yeah.
It would be an additional first and possibly second grade class at Emerson, whether we move the two, if we move a first and second grade, or we move an entire art strand over to Emerson is what's up for debate. But somewhere there would be an additional first grade math, science strand and a second grade possibly. So it would be the addition of 1 or 2 classes next year, and moving the gifted, whether it moves all at once to Hanby or moves a grade level at a time, is the discussion that's going on as to how that would benefit the program and the kids better.
And when would we know those pieces? I'm just thinking about lottery and people making choices for next year.
Well, we would know that after we get more feedback from the staff in the next couple of weeks. I think we'll be able to sit down and work as to what our plan is going to be.
Okay, so I'm trying to take what you said and piece together then, like, what are the different scenarios, right? So it's adding first and/or second grade math, science. That would be added at Hanby. It would go straight into Hanby, right? And then the question beyond that, so I guess first of all, like, what is that contingent on, right? So there's additional feedback in terms of who moves when and where, but in terms of like adding a first grade and/or second grade, what's the additional information we need to decide that piece?
I don't know that there's additional information. I think that happens.
Okay. Because you said and/or second grade, I'm sort of like, okay, well, how do we figure out the and/or there, right?
I think it's 2 pieces. One is how that plays out against the resources we've allocated for staffing next year, right? And the second one is how much movement we do. Because if there's a lot of shifting, one of the scenarios would end up with all of the gifted moving out of Emerson, leaving 5 teachers there. If we only put 1 grade level, you now only have 6 teachers over there, and you've magnified the problem we were talking about, which is the teaming piece. So as we look at that option, I think one of the things we talked about was if that was one of the scenarios that we ended up doing that was acceptable to everybody, it might be better to do 2 grade levels at once and then 2 again the next year, if that fits into our staffing allocation going into next year and doesn't start to erode the budget piece, right? So the financial constraint. But I think what we looked at was if we take all the gifted teachers out at once, you're now down to 5 teachers in a first grade classroom, and that's pretty depleted. It becomes a struggle point, if I remember Barb correctly, for our specials program and the imbalance of where those students are for PE and et cetera, because they share some staffing. So we heard back from staff that would create some imbalance in how we do that. So we think as we get back from spring break, we're getting feedback from teachers now in written format about the how and when of the movement, what their suggestions are, put that together, and I think within sometime in mid-April, we should have a more concrete transition plan of who's going when. But to Barb's point, for next year, yeah, move forward with the overall goal of adding at least a strand and moving forward with expanding the math science program.
Okay.
There were also questions from teachers about where they would be assigned, and we want to walk through that with the association and what the contract is. Scott Reeves has been on top of that one as well. So that was a question from some of the teachers about where would I go? And then, of course, once we have a more concrete plan with the actual who's going where, parent communication, in terms of the lottery, we have the option of going ahead and extending that time period if we want to do that. And I think that's a point we're going to go back to this week, is to say, you know, as we look at it and the timing of this, because it closes on Friday, does it make sense for us to do that, and what does that look like? So we see those pieces in front of us. We got some decisions to make this week about that particular piece that we're going to frame, but we wanted to make sure the board was, this was the path that we heard them say they want to go. Want to make sure that they're okay. You see the financial pieces. That's what we're thinking.
Okay, thanks, that's really helpful. It leads me to a follow-up question, and I might be missing a piece of information here, but I'm just thinking through the different possibilities and not asking you to say which one's happening, because I realize we're still gathering information. I'm just trying to like process them. So you mentioned, if we took all the gifted classes out of Emerson next year and just, put in a first and second grade arts, that's a pretty depleted building. So that leads me to a question of, do we need to put first and or second grade arts at Emerson to make space for additional math science strands? Or is that just an effort to like do a slow move? You see what I'm saying? Like, could everyone stay where they are and we add math science, or do we actually need to move people to make that happen? Because by my understanding of how many empty classrooms we had, we didn't need to make space at Hanby.
For a short time period, everybody could effectively stay where they are. So the question is whether or not, what's the appropriate time to move them? But
Right.
Hamby, we could move all, because if we can move all of the gifted right now, that means that we have 6 classrooms available right now to add to
Yep.
Hamby. So
Yeah,
they could
Okay.
stay.
they could stay.
But
Okay.
Scott, we couldn't put that plus another math science there without moving world cultures. We don't have 8 classrooms there. Is that what you were asking?
I'm trying to figure out all those various scenarios, yeah. So that's sort of my next follow-up.
Yeah,
It's like we
so
couldn't put
I'm
8.
sorry if I was unclear. We could add the 2 new sections at Hamby without moving anybody, if that is the question that you were asking.
Right, yeah, that's
But
step
only
one.
for 1 year.
Yes. Yep, thank you. Yeah, so it's really about speed and, okay, that's all helpful additional information, thanks. I'm sure I'll have more questions.
I want to take a step back and make sure I understand exactly what we're looking at. Can you tell me exactly what the composition is expected to be at Emerson and at Hanby if we go down the path that we're talking about now, so that I make sure I'm on the same page that all of you are on?
When we're finished?
Yeah.
When we're finished, I understood it was 2 math science strands and the gifted at Hamby, and a world cultures and an art strand at Emerson.
Okay, thank you. It helps. A lot of talk about lots of different configurations. I want to make sure that we're all thinking about the same groups of students where. So if we do this phase-in that we're talking about, basically, what I think I heard leaves arts depleted at Hanby and Emerson as arts makes that transition. So we would be moving students out of Hanby, arts students out of Hanby into Emerson, okay? A couple of levels would go to Emerson, which means there'd be a couple down arts at Hanby at the same time that we're increasing math science at Hanby. So what I'm hearing is something that we need to be thinking about, which is the depletion, if you will, of presence of arts in each of those buildings, the arts magnet strand, not the arts themselves, but the magnet strand at each of those buildings. That is a bit of a worry to me. It's not just a bit of, it is a worry, a significant worry to me, because what I'm looking at as we look at all of this to get to where we intend to be in 5 years is who is being uprooted when, and how is that going to play on their sense of belonging, their sense of curricular connection, our efforts as the advisory committee, the Magnet School Advisory Committee gets going. All of this then means that we have to really pay close attention to what we'd be doing to both disrupt and then to deal with that disruption that's going to be ongoing for 5 years. So I'm really focused on that. As I said last time, I'm all in favor of expanding the magnets. I think the advisory committee is extremely important, You know, John has had me hammer at him for years about what was the intention of magnets and how is it going to benefit the district. And I think we'll get back to those kind of questions and discussions. But how we do that without hurting cohesion and without diminishing program belonging and program sense of permanence is weighing on me.
I think that was a big part of the discussion with teachers as it transitioned from about the change to about the possibilities for the program piece. A lot of discussion at Hanby about, as we've mentioned before, Hanby has taken the bull by the horns and kind of done the STEAM thing, right, of their own accord, right? Although we advertise it as science and fine arts, and so, for example, one of the teachers suggested that they have been assigned to the fine arts portion of this, but would be interested in staying and taking on the position of staying there in that grade level and transitioning into whatever happens at Hanby, rather than them moving, right? So that was a shift in our thinking. And what we heard a lot of, I was at the Hanby session, so I wasn't at the Emerson session with Paul and Kaylee, but Barb and I and Cheryl at the Hanby session, there was a lot of discussion about the program piece and maintaining STEAM as a component of that, and their excitement about that piece. And we've heard, at least anecdotally, from some of the gifted teachers about the possibilities that means for them if they go to Hanby, and that program definition becomes no longer 2 strands, but a STEAM school. And the same kind of conversations going on at Emerson. So these are all the possibilities that people are seeing by the reshuffling and the additional resources along the way, that I think both staff, very talented and very committed. I think if we give them that voice and that opportunity through that committee, we can work collectively on assuring people that they're going to have a good experience there, that we're on the right path.
Can I jump in here
Yeah,
with you? Because
sure,
I'm hearing what you're saying. So in our effort to restore what was broken down at the magnets, I'm concerned about this playing out for 5 years in the erosion. I'm worried about not being able to build a culture at a new school with a new program. I am concerned about, we're moving a ton of kids next year. The elitism, we've heard this for years, right? These programs are elite, that they wouldn't have to move, but everyone else in the district has to move. You know, there are times where I think it's appropriate to share your personal experience. Had a kid in the magnets that was the last year after, I will call it the demise. And every year, Beth knows this, my kid was one of the kids packing up the other teacher. It was like, and I'll use this as someone else's word, it was like hospice every year. It was horrific for those kiddos, losing a beloved teacher because the school was a family. So I worry about that, and even looking at some of the Longfellow teachers and seeing what happened with them this year, I think it was tough. I think, you know, knowing it's coming but it not happening, I think sometimes that's more hurtful than beneficial. And I would like to say, and I love our staff, I love you guys so much. This is really about the kids and not about the comfort of our staff. And I don't want to hurt feelings there, but I feel like I need to say that. So I would just ask, as you're planning, to please keep that in mind. I love an advisory council. I love what these programs can be. I mean, knowing the staff, I mean, they're going to be amazing. I love that we're going to have that choice again. I think it's so important, and I do think it will make us a destination district. Once again, just one other piece that would bring us to a destination, because we have lots of pieces. So, you know, I'm speaking a lot with my heart right now and not my head, but those are my thoughts and my feelings. And Paul?
Yeah, President Davidson, it seems like you might have been at our Emerson teacher, because the teachers, and many of them, a few of them are here this evening. They were so thoughtful And so, and the driving force is what's best for students. Exactly what you just said there. And it didn't surprise me at all, but we kind of did a little protocol where they looked at opportunities and considerations. And the opportunities was this will create more, opportunities. And the timing was very important because one of the things that wasn't surprised to learn from many of our gifted teachers is they do a lot of experiential learning, whether it's robotics or different things. And if we don't move very quickly and we kind of do a slow thing, and they're in Hamby, they may not have the space needed to do some of these activities. So as hard as it may be, I think one of them used the idea of you just got to pull that Band-Aid off and, and do what's best for children. So, and that's what I love about this committee is I think that we will get some wonderful ideas and some things that we didn't think about, but that they live this every day. And so their feedback will be very instrumental in moving this forward in the most thoughtful and considerate way for our students and staff.
Even the pace of implementation, number of FTE per year, which really comes back to the financial pieces we're talking about. If opportunities arise as we go down the path, right, for going faster, I think we should look at that. I think that's always the goal for any of these. If the opportunity presents itself, as Ms. Marshall shared, we do face another biannual budget next year. And so if that changes and creates more opportunity for us, we may be able to go 2-3 and be done, or 2-2-1. So there are other scenarios. Given what we know right now, we're looking at it, we're trying to meet the board's desire to move forward, put this program back up on its feet the way we want it to be expanded, but at a pace that allows us to stay with what we know. So I think we're all on the same page about the desire to go faster and bigger. I think it's a matter of where we are financially and how much we want to put in each year. But our goal would always be to go faster. And if money wasn't the issue, this would be a much shorter meeting, wouldn't it? But it is, and we know that, and you know that, and the public knows that. And so, yeah, we're always going to have an eye on going faster if we can.
I'm still struggling with it. I really am struggling with a 5-year phase-in and the slow tearing apart of the cultures that are extremely important in those buildings. Financially, it is a problem. I'd be interested in looking a little more closely at the problem it is so that we can understand that before, really before I can say, yeah, I'm gung-ho on this phase-in over 5 years, which you can clearly tell by my voice I'm not. I would like to see the impact that moving more quickly would have, whether it's, all of the gifted, whether it's all the arts, however we look at all of the world cultures, however we look at whatever, even those who are staying are being ripped apart from those they have been with. Part of that is unavoidable because you reach a time you must go. Other parts are within our purview to limit the damage. And I'm looking at how we best limit the damage when the time comes, whether it's time to move on to another grade level or whether it's through structural changes like we're talking about. What do we do to minimize that damage? And one of the things for me to really come to terms with is why the slow tearing apart has to be the way we go.
So, excuse me. I'm just wondering when, I'm more of a visual person, so when we might be able to see something, here are the various scenarios. I know we've talked through them, and then also what potentially those pros and cons are of each of those scenarios. That would be really helpful.
That's what we're building out in our conversations with teachers, grabbing that information from their perspective, aligning all that, so that we can see what that is. And I think there's various opinions, even as we're talking about, we all have various opinions on how fast to go, so we're going to see that. There's the teacher movement, there's the student movement, right? So if we move all of fine arts in one fell swoop, that means all those kids who had been at Hanby with their other, so they face it, as are many students across the district next year with the new elementary. So that's all part of the thinking. So yeah, that's what we're trying to sort out is what's the way to do this within the financials that we have right now. And so I would tell you, like I said, I think within the mid of April, we'll have a time to digest that, make sure we have it right, balance that, and bring in front of the board what we think the best scenarios are to move that thing forward. And as we continue, and we'll do some of this evening, as we continue looking at finances and staffing for some of these things, we'll see what those opportunities are, both this year and in the future.
I just have one other question. When do we tell the parents about, I know that's up
We
for
can always,
debate,
it's a great question. So when do we communicate with parents? So we could communicate something now before spring break that says we are looking at. And I think part of that communication, and I think this is, we want to get through tonight, make sure we're all on the same page before we made any decision about expanding, opening up the application period longer. There's certainly some value in doing that. But any communication at this point, and probably before spring break, is going to lack any details. So we want to work that through and think about how to do that. Do we do a changes come in, going to extend the registration period, more details to come? I think it's a sequence. So we want to make sure we're on the same page with the board on continuing our efforts to expand the magnet, have a plan, continue the planning process, look at the resources. We can go back and do that. I tend to be leaning, and we'll talk more as a team, I tend to be leaning on extending the application period. But then it gets into granular questions like, if I've already applied and I've applied for the fine arts program on the assumption that it's going to be at Hamby, and now you're moving it to Emerson, and or my kids in so we have all that, right? So some of the details as part of the communication, yeah. So it's a tough time to be doing some of that, but I think we can work that out. So I think our recommendation before we go on spring break is to the board's going to be say, we're going to extend that application time period. Just, there's some absolutes in there that are going to be a little problematic as we get some more detail. So we'll have to figure out how to do that piece and allow for contingencies.
Yeah,
That
I
make sense?
appreciate that. Yeah, I think transparency is always great, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Do we want to talk about, I think we talked a little bit this morning about the applications that we had received so far.
So, yeah, by extending the application period, it allows for some other folks to make some choices based on what they might have heard tonight. We have had, as of this morning, I think it's a little over 230 applications, quite a bit for math science, a few for arts and world cultures. We'll be able to fill everything right now if we just went as is, including probably the first and second grade sections for math science if needed. So you would possibly lose some of these candidates if something's changing, maybe gain a few more, but in general right now, the applications look very strong at this point in terms of quantities.
I do think we need to put some communication out and let people know. Just, we're looking, we're going to expand next year, not sure about movement,
Well, that's what we thought we'd be, so we'll have that out this week. I know Greg's back there taking notes.
Anything else?
I just want to go back to what Jen said, and your comments, questions about if we were to begin the expansion of the math science component, do we need to move anybody else yet? And I think that is something that we still do need to weigh as we look at how this is implemented with what sort of fidelity with the community and the staff and the students. It's worth thinking about. So thanks for bringing that up.
Okay, moving on. We are at Student Mental Health and Wellness. Tammy Santa.
Good evening again. So you'll see on the outline right? This is the reminder of that summary. So you're going to see both a summary of additions for mental health as well as the wellness side. Those first two bullets, A and B, speak to the mental health, which can be dependent on that Concord Adam H grant and the direction that that grant gives us here in the next month. So essentially, this could be a have-to if the grant dictates that, or it could also be a want-to, right? Because it is a great plan regardless of the grant directive. Benefits both middle school and elementary levels greatly regarding the mental health supports and additions there. As the new middle school opens, we have a plan in place, as you see it laid out here, to gradually add in those mental health supports, which would be school social workers. That's a 4-year period that you're looking at right now. We obviously can go quicker if we're able, or slow down if we need to as well. We've put together what that would look like by adding 2, then 2 Concord people go down, the rest of the Concord people stay, right? And it's just a scaffolding plan that will work out as seamlessly as we can. So that's just a quick overview of what those 2 mental health pieces look like. And then that last bullet point represents the clinic support. So again, just trying to have a heavy focus on having a person help to create standard operating procedures that, the goal and the aim would be to really improve that clinic coverage system, and most importantly, create some more consistent ways to operate our clinics so we can make better long-term plans moving forward. Any questions?
Tammy, I just want to mention the item C, that is paid for out of the ESSER funds, so it's not on this spreadsheet was only meant to show the impact to the 5-year forecast, and that would be a 2-year position paid for out of the ESSER funds.
And what would happen to that position after 2 years?
It would either need to be absorbed into a different position through attrition, or if we wanted to continue that specific position, it would have an impact on the 5-year forecasts.
It would be posted as a 2-year grant-funded position, so the person taking it would understand that it's limited.
And then we would reevaluate in 2 years, is that? Okay.
I think the initial reason, correct me if I'm wrong, Tammy, the initial reason we looked at 2 years was this is really about providing Tammy's team some support in this area that we know has lacked program evaluation. Mm-hmm. So this is really a person who's can help fill in and help with program evaluation and help us establish it to fit what the needs of our kids. From that point, if we feel the need to continue that piece, then we would look at that. But we think initially it's a 2-year deal to help us get our feet underneath us with that program. If there's anything we've learned, one of the many things we learned from COVID is the value of our health clinics, and looking at the strengths and weaknesses. And at the same time we were doing that, we were changing the organizational structure up here with Tammy's office, and so we just feel like we want to give her office some support for giving this a careful look over and giving us better recommendations so we can better serve our kids and families in the future. Is that about right, Tammy? Thanks.
Yeah, essentially, I'd like someone with that expert background to really take a closer look at our clinics. They're going to do it a lot more efficiently than I am. And then, as Dr. Kellogg said, really look at a long-term plan for our clinics. And I don't think that is a long-term position when I look at it. So we'll know more, a year from now, 2 years from now. Hey, is this something that we still need, or do we feel we're at a pretty good spot to have those operating procedures cleaned up and better systems in place to then dissolve that, put it into practice somewhere else, or move on?
Okay.
I have a question. This full-time person using the ESSER funds, this is already those funds are allocated for that particularly, or the ask here is to use ESSER funds. It might not make any sense. Use the ESSER funds to hire this full-time person.
So we're still planning for how to allocate the ESSER, the round 3 funds for ESSER,
Okay.
the ARP grant, and so this would take that.
Okay.
Yeah, as part of that.
Thank you.
wish I had lots of stringent questions to ask you about this, but quite frankly, I do not, because our clinics have suffered for years. And it only became that much more obvious as all the difficulties that we faced going through COVID made their appearance. So I don't have a lot of stringent questions about application or moving it along. I, like everything else, know that we need to move as quickly as we possibly can. But this takes care of historic inadequacy and burgeoning inadequacies as best we can at this point in time. In my mind.
I have to agree with that. I'm happy to see that happen. I wanted to ask about the plan to sort of grow the mental health specialists, right? While we're sort of moving the Concord counseling folks to elementary. So obviously, you know, we like to go faster with things rather than more slowly. But I would love to hear, again, because you touched on a little bit last time, but the 2 FTE in FY24, how you envision that working, and then as you add people on, like, whoops, excuse me, how the existing folks work will shift when we continue to bring new people on every year.
Yeah, and I'm happy to share a little bit more details. We've sketched a little bit of that out, so great questions. When that middle school opens, we would need to see the enrollment numbers, see where the SLCs land, right? We want to just be thoughtful about what each school looks like, and then that will determine where those first 2 full-time people would go. For me, it's important. The middle schools have had, it's been Concord, but the same person in their building every day. So it just depends on who's still employed through Concord is one piece to that puzzle, and then what are these 2 new hires looking like? So ideally, the 2 people would go full-time into 2 buildings. We would leave 3 of 5 Concord people on the other 3 and keep that continuity. So if we still have the same person at Blendon or Genoa or wherever it might be, those are the things we won't know until we know. We would be thoughtful about those pieces and then take either 2 new people from Concord that may not have a relationship in the building or some existing, and then those would be the 2 that would start in the elementary programs. And again, same thing the next year, we may start to then, you know, split a little bit when you're adding 1 and adding 1 and adding 1. But we think we have a pretty good plan that makes sense, that it's the least disruptive, right? Doing the least amount of harm and making the most predictable switches we can with the mental health supports. Does that answer it enough?
Yeah, thank you. So they really are sort of one-to-one on school buildings. I mean, these FTE. And then if you can remind me, because I'm digging back here into the material from last time, on the Adam H funding and changes expected there, like what's the speed of that, right, as we're drawing down?
Of their changes? So the changes would go into effect, so they're on a calendar year, Adam H grant is, so it would actually be halfway through next school year. So January would begin their possible shift if they shift. We've been talking with Concord and have that longstanding relationship, so we are prepared to navigate those differences as we go. The biggest difference is going to be trying to pick up those IEP minutes, so that'll be the biggest hurdle that we have. The other pieces of prevention and other dollars we have with Concord, we should be able to piece some things together for those next years as we pop down into it. It won't be ideal, but we also have some other supports right now. A school social worker that is ours serving SLCs at Heritage, so we would be thoughtful about having that building be supported differently, so maybe there's only 2 others. I mean, we'll look through all those things, but.
Okay, yeah, thanks. It just helps me imagine all the different moving parts, because it's a lot of moving parts. Thanks.
Do you have anything else, Liz? Like my colleagues, I'm supportive of this plan, definitely. As far as the ESSER grant fund in that position, my only ask would be a yearly check-in to kind of let us know the impact there and the data that's collected, and, you know, so we can see how we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That would be my only ask. Anybody else? Nope. Okay, thank you. Moving on to middle school redesign, Ann Baldwin and Paul Hopkins.
Good evening. Our middle schools are currently in the process of finalizing course requests from our current students, and we're gearing up for collecting those music requests from our fifth graders, soon to be sixth graders, and that will take place after spring break. And once we get those numbers, we're anxious to begin building our schedule, and one of our asks for next year is additional FTE to support our elective and exploratory courses. And tonight I did a printout of a typical schedule just to help you visualize what that would mean, or how that ask would support the work that we're doing at middle school. And you'll see our sixth grade typical student schedule, and then on the right, sixth grade exploratory courses and the length of those courses. And in sixth and seventh grade, we call them exploratory courses because our students take them all to explore a variety of different courses to understand maybe what they like and what they don't like. And in the eighth grade, as we're preparing them for high school, they have elective options. So they get to choose up to 2 units of electives. And you'll see a sixth grade schedule. Our students are on teams, and so they have their 4 core courses, a flex period, which allows for opportunity for academic support and enrichment. And then they have literacy skills for career exploration and PE, which our students actually take every other day. We a semester long. And then they have a music option, and opposite of that music, our music tends to be every other day at 6th and 7th grade level. They'll have a study hall. In 7th grade, our students have their 4 core courses. Engineering and art are semester long, and they pair up together for a period. And then we have medical detectives and health, which are quarter-long courses. So students will take that, and that ends up being a semester, and then they'll have a semester study hall opposite of that. Because right now we don't have any other quarter classes that connect with those. And then the other period can be a study hall or a music course. And in 7th grade, we have choir, band, orchestra as options for our students to continue with music. So potentially you have multiple study halls at your 7th grade level. And our proposal in adding that FTE is to expand that medical detectives course and health course from a quarter long to a semester long. Then those would pair with each other, and that period would be filled. So then your option for study hall would be if you don't take music, or even if you're in music, you'd have a study hall opportunity every other day, because those courses are offered every other day right now. And then in 8th grade, you'll see our students have 4 core courses and lunch, and then there are 3 class periods essentially for electives. And when you don't have an elective that fits in your schedule, or you don't request more than 2 units of elective, you will have a study hall. And the issue that we see right now too is with some of our elective courses, like computer science for innovators and makers, which is CSIM, I should have spelled that out on here, is that we have 2 FTE right now, and they're shared between the buildings. So Genoa will have computer science for innovators and makers in the afternoon, and Heritage might have that teacher in the morning. And so that does limit your scheduling opportunities, and you may find that students may request several different electives, but as you build that master schedule, there are constraints, and you may not be able to give them everything that they've requested because you just don't have the staffing for that there at that time. So that is, as we look at giving our middle school students a robust experience that's focused around middle school and exploration and getting them prepared for that next step, we think it's really important to give them those exploratory opportunities, those elective opportunities. And we've made great strides in that area. It's been exciting to add some courses back to that middle school. And these are exciting courses. They're hands-on courses. They are opportunities to connect the core content that they're learning. And again, a chance to explore so that when they do get to high school, they have a better idea of what pathways and opportunities they want to engage in then. So that is just kind of a quick overview of that ask we're making. And I'm happy to answer any other questions you may have.
What ask would have the greatest impact for your middle schools?
All of them.
Well
But I
done.
wouldn't have asked
Well
for-
done.
our team would have asked for them. I think when we look at, a key impact, I think with our students, that elective options and giving them additional opportunities instead of being in a study hall, I think is really important. And then the instructional coach ask that we have, we had an instructional coach when we began teaming, and that position became vacant, and we weren't able to hire that with the right person. And that is an opportunity. We've done really great things with our sixth grade teaming, and we had support, and that support helped our staff think about how we use that flex time, because it's an exciting opportunity, but it's also a different opportunity to be able to move students in and out of a class period. It's not, they go to science every day, it's really based on their need. And so we're taking a look at data and how they're doing, and we're developing cross-curricular projects that our students can engage in, and having that coach that provides support for our teachers to engage in that work is really important. And not only having that support and helping our principals to also understand how to support those teams, it's cross-pollination of ideas. So the strength in our district, I think, is that we have 4 middle schools, soon to be 5, and we have so many experts in all of those buildings and so many cool things that are going on, and the opportunity to share those ideas so that we can really build on those strengths and provide those opportunities for students across Westerville as we see them work. So I was talking to Scott Gaddis at Genoa, had his 6th grade team did a project, changed their bell schedule, and it worked really well. And when we have a coach, there's an opportunity to make sure that that knowledge gets shared with all of our middle schools, and it doesn't just sit in one. So I think those 2 pieces are going to help continue the work that we've started and get us back. And then as we bring on our design team and reconvene that work, I'm excited to see what's next. And as we look at our middle school model and think about advisory and teaming in a way that provides connections for our students, opportunities for interdisciplinary instruction is really important. So that teaming might look different as we look at 7th grade and 8th grade. It doesn't have to be the exact model we have. Teaming can be 2 teachers working together, but it's building smaller learning communities and providing opportunities for our teachers to collaborate too.
So this is a clarification question. The coach, would they just be working with 6th grade teams, or all middle schools sharing best practices?
All middle school.
All middle
So
schools.
it really was geared to get that up and running, but as we look at middle school design, it would be supporting all of the middle schools.
So 5 FTE next year would close the gap on the quarter classes for all 4 middle schools. How does that impact, and maybe it's already baked into the middle school coming online, is it, the FTE?
We're looking at that staffing plan and what does that look like for next year. I've talking with Scott about that.
We have included additional staffing in the new middle school staffing plan based on this as a possibility. So if we move forward this way, then we have sufficient space with the new middle school FTE that we had currently allotted for the building coming online. If we choose not to, then that FTE would be used in a different way.
Okay.
What else is everyone thinking?
One of the data sets I want to share on the study hall piece, because we pulled this apart, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ann, but across the district, between the 7th and 8th graders and the number of study halls, right now we're staring at about over 50% of our middle schoolers in 7th and 8th grade are having more than 1 study hall per day at some point during the year. So that's the gap we're filling across 7th and 8th grade. That's the 7 FTE and expansion of those opportunities for those kids. That's what we're trying to solve with the 7 FTE for next year. And then the coach, I think, and it might be worth talking a little bit more about, we keep mentioning middle school. I think it might be worth talking a little bit about what we mean about middle school from a research evidence-based model as a best practice versus junior high school, and the common misunderstanding about that. Would you mind?
It's the idea too that the time of, or the growth that students experience between 6th and 8th grade is by far greater than any other time period in a student's life. And having opportunity to, instead of just shuffling kids in classes, and they go from an elementary environment where they have a teacher that they know really well or a couple of teachers, and you go to a bigger school and now you're managing between 6 and 7 different teachers and periods. You're working on grades versus you have letter grades now and GPAs. It is, instead of a mini high school where we just kind of throw them in and they go, it's an opportunity for us to connect them with a trusted adult that helps them navigate middle school life and the relationships that they are building and going through. And so when we look at middle schools versus junior high, we have advisories as a structure, and that's something that our teams are interested in reviewing. Our middle school teams, we have opportunities for academic intervention within the school day to make sure that they are getting a solid foundation and are prepared for that next step. We have worked with AMLE, which is the Association Middle, I gotta look it up. Yeah, Middle Level Education. They have a document that's actually just been updated. I'm waiting on my new copy on Keys to Educating Young Adolescents. And this has been a focus of our work and will continue to be a focus of our work so that we are serving our middle school students.
I have a question that's sort of a very specific question, so apologize for that. But on medical detectives and health, right? And the idea of expanding those, the quarter now to semester, is that sort of a convenient thing to do? Because you can, the math works out well, right? You take the quarter, you expand them to the semester. Or are you hearing from like teachers and students, like we need more time to really get through, or there's so much more potential in these two classes? So I guess, is it an issue of convenience, or is it like where we really need to go educationally with those two courses?
I think we've gotten asked, when we did medical detectives and rolled that out, our teachers weren't able to get through all of the labs in that amount of time, the 9 weeks that we had. And the things that our medical detectives instructors have done to even add to the class and bringing in guest speakers has made it an exciting opportunity for our students. And I think they've enjoyed teaching it, and not being able to get to all of that content that there is has been a request, can we make this longer? And then with health too, when we talk about health for our students, I think we would have no problem expanding that, and we'd be able to do that in a short amount of time, and I think it's good for our students too. And that health content, and talk about healthy relationships, and we talk about mental health and SEL, I think that's really important, especially in middle school when they're going through so many transitions too. So I think it's convenient, which is helpful, but I also think it's good for our students, and that we have talented staff that could really take it to the next level too.
Great, thank you. I mean, I sort of figured that was the answer, but it's worth asking because the math is.
And there's a training component, like in Project Lead and medical detectives too, and why we're thinking about it now too, is there is a training component that we want to make sure that our staff is supported in rolling that out too.
Great, thank you. And then you mentioned sort of social, emotional, and mental health pieces. Tammy, do you see any opportunity by expanding health to like bring in additional pieces that you would like to see in middle school?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was some of the pieces that, when that 2012, we depleted a lot of that content. So to reignite a lot of that important stuff, as well as we talked a few board meetings ago, Hope Squad coming down into middle school and having more support there, QPR, just a landing place for a lot more content would be huge.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question about teaming. And I'm curious as to what teaming would look like in 8th and 7th grade. And I know you and I talked a little bit about teaming in 6th grade and just the experience that I heard from the kids. So I'm just curious as to what teaming might look like. Is it similar, or would it look differently?
So it would depend on the research or the design team's recommendations, and I think there are lots of different models, and we have some in Ohio too. There's Ohio schools that work, and that is some of the schools that were visited when determining what the 6th grade model looked like. But it can be a variety of things, and it's really based on like what is the outcome you want from it. And like when we looked at 6th grade, our outcome is transition. We knew that transition to middle school was hard for our students, as evidenced by their grades. We had attendance, we had discipline issues, and so when we looked at our state test scores, so we talked about how do we help transition students in 6th grade, create that smaller learning community. And then as we look to 7th grade, they're different. I mean, now they've had that 1 year of experience under their belt, and the important thing that we want to think about is how do we help provide a smaller learning community, interdisciplinary units for our students, and collaboration time for our teachers too, because that type of work doesn't just happen magically. It takes a lot of work on the adult end to make those things happen too. So how can we pair up and connect staff to make those things happen too? So it could be teams of 2. You could have English and social studies paired together. Lots of different varieties, and I think that's the exciting piece about it. And having our design team go out there, understand what is the need of our students, and then what models are out there, and then come forward with a best recommendation for moving forward.
And if I could add just really quickly to that a little bit, one of the things I've heard from a lot of our administrators, our teachers, students, and parents is that the 6th grade team is great, but one of the unintended consequences of it is you're around that team all day long, is that once you go to 7th and 8th grade, it might be like dyads, these, she said, a humanities-based team. And you start to see in 7th and 8th grade students kind of moving at different paces, whether maybe it's in world languages, maybe it's in their math selection. So it allows for some of that, but it also allows students to interact more with more groups of people in the 7th and 8th grade, because what we're trying to do in this middle school experience is prepare them for the high school. So we're kind of slowly moving from one self-connected community to many different, again, supported communities, but allow them to interact with their peers a little bit more along the way. So I think that's a good opportunity.
I appreciate that. I actually brought that up to Ann, that what I consistently heard from my daughter and her friends was, I don't like being isolated, I miss my friends, or they would get into fights because they were consistently around each other. And I'm sure it wasn't great for the teachers either.
So I'm going to take that vision for that teaming in 7th, 8th grade even further and make some connectivity. So think about our students. We've talked about magnets. And for years, what we've talked about is when they leave and they go to middle school, then what? So think about the opportunities of dyads in 7th and 8th grade around humanities, fine arts, STEAM, that can be created through that kind of a model in the future to create that. It also allows our kids to start focusing in and go back to those portrait of graduate skills when we look at the flex period and those opportunities that are in there, Hope Squad and how that might fit in. So there's a lot of opportunity in there. If we just think of teaming as what it looks like in 6th grade, we've limited ourselves. We have cost structures built out based on that premise that could completely change based on the recommendations of that team and what we might need to do. So I just think there's great opportunity in there for our middle school kids as we explore that as a possibility, not as a absolute. So.
I have just a quick follow-up. Sorry.
No, you're fine. You're just joking.
Oh, so you said dyads to kind of, what I heard, so I'm just repeating what I heard to make sure that I heard correctly, is dyads, because some students move at different paces. I'm just curious how that would play out for the content, right? And the teachers that are trying to get them to learn the content and the grading and all of that. And you might not know that answer yet, and that's fine too.
And I think it'll kind of organically evolve along the way, because one of the things that I'm always amazed at our teachers is their level of differentiation to allow for that stretch and for that reinforcement, because you're going to need that in every classroom, regardless of what the team might be. And I think that's something this team will learn, and that this instructional coach that Ms. Baldwin is recommending will be able to help us along the way, to help make continuous improvement along the way, to ensure that we're meeting the program outcomes along the way.
I have been really impressed with the teacher's ability to keep on top of all of the various needs of the students. I appreciate that. I don't think that's an easy task.
So first, I want to say I so appreciate your excitement and exuberance over this. You can tell you're very passionate about it. So when you're talking about curriculum and the presentation, I truly appreciate it. You make me want to give you everything.
It's fun.
Fortunately.
It's fun work, and I'm lucky to get to work with the team I do.
I agree. So thinking about a couple of things, when I guess I would ask for a little bit more data, probably not a little, probably a lot, on the middle school teaming, and I'm not even sure what I'm looking for yet. I feel like I love the idea, especially that transition from 5th to 6th. I think that is, super hard, and supports being in place, 100% supportive. Would like to see a little more data before I would feel comfortable looking at the investment. Concerns me, and I just want to share this in public, as far as levies coming and cuts, and I look at Mark because I feel like he's like the chopper. I'm sorry, Mark. I know everyone looks at you that way, like, so sustainability, that I want it to be so impactful that this community knows about it and will continue to support it. So, and I know as we look at the calendar, we're not looking at doing teaming next year. So maybe we could, in 7th or 8th grade, maybe we could think a little bit more about that, the data points that we want. Jen, I know you're part of the curriculum team, and Vaughn, and kind of figure out what our measures would be. I would like to see that. I'm excited about the coach piece a lot. Would love to hear a little bit, I kept wanting you to talk more about that. I think I'm picturing it the way you're stating it. The person would be, and I'm sorry, I keep going back to this, but so this person may spend a week at a middle school, right, working with teachers, and then move on to another middle school, or how did it work before?
It depends on the need that previously that person would meet with teams, probably travel to different buildings every day, like spend one day in a
Gotcha.
building to make sure that they were connecting with all of the teams as we go along. So I think that schedule would vary based on need.
Okay.
But the idea is that building relationships with all of the staffs and being a resource for all of the middle schools.
And at some point, I think before COVID, maybe during COVID, I'm sorry, I can't remember, we did have staff members traveling to different buildings sharing best practices. Was that part of it?
So as part, we started out with middle school design, we actually did a appreciative inquiry of all of our middle schools. So the design team, which comprised of folks from every middle school, went to each middle school and interviewed students, observed classes, understood what great things were happening. And then this year we did attempt learning rounds. And the goal was to have a teacher leader and administrator from each secondary building come together and do learning rounds and observe classes and look at what instructional practices were taking place. We got held up a little bit with COVID and coverage and slowed down, but we're excited to continue that work next year because we had great conversations as educators, and administrators, and teachers about what teaching and learning was going on in our buildings and what do our students need more of and what do they need less of, and how can we help support them, the teacher level, the building administrator level, and then the district administration too. How can we support the work that they're doing in the buildings? So that's an important process I'm looking forward to getting back to next fall.
Okay. And then one last piece for me, and I'll be quiet on this. And I've spoken to you about it and Paul about it, as far as supports for kids that need support, whether they're on an IEP or just not grasping a concept. I would love to see something, we've talked about this next year, where whether it's during a study hall, I would like to see something during the day where there were some supports built in, because we've heard over and over, I should say I have heard over and over, that need for our kiddos, so.
So I have several thoughts swirling around in my head, and I'll hopefully be able to disentangle them enough to make sense of what I'm saying. First of all, I'm going to ask the simple, concrete question. Given the middle school concept, and given our struggles to fully implement the middle school concept, and given the components of the middle school concept that deal very closely with social emotional development and student engagement around learning, is it possible to use ESSER funds to pay for the coach?
Yeah. I mean, it would definitely be an allowable cost for the coach for 2 years, yeah.
Buys us a little extra.
Yeah.
A little extra. So that was.
You can add
that's
that in your
my
20% learning loss that
There you
you're
go.
planning
Yeah,
for.
right. Yeah. Because in my thinking, it totally fits there. And it's not, I cannot say with any fidelity that it's only because of COVID. But I can say that COVID exacerbated the learning issues that you see at that particular age level. And that goes back to the discussion of what is actually the difference between a junior high and a middle school. And I often think that's difficult for us in Westerville, because every time Mark started cutting things, we ended up with significant damage to our middle school program, with the result that we never fully implemented a middle school model here. So we've always had this uneasy fit of a middle school model and a junior high model. And so what we see, we ran smack into COVID as we came out of the middle school redesign process, and all the work that had gone into that to finally move us into a middle school program. And then there were financial considerations, FTE considerations across the district that limited our implementation. And then COVID, it impacted our data collection on the 6th grade piece. It impacted any other changes. And at the same time that our process stalled where it was, we then saw all the issues that arise because of this sounds like I'm going back to magnets, I'm not, of a too slow implementation. We ended up with all those study halls for all those kids, which is not what I think hardly anybody wants. Some study halls, fine. All those study halls are not. So we had, again, a stutter from trying to get to full middle school. So what I'm looking at, and as I'm looking at this, I'm looking at what you need. One is, I offset a little bit of the cost with ESSER, give us a little break there. The other is what you are asking for. You are asking for FTE to expand elective offerings. Now, that's easy to say we don't really need elective offerings, that's because they're electives. We can just do what we've done in this district and cut back to core at middle school when times get hard. When you're talking about expanding current elective offerings, what we're talking about is what Paul was getting at. If I'm wrong, tell me. Okay, but this is how I'm processing it. What Paul was getting at is we started in elementary, and we're all together, and we're all going along, we're all doing the same thing, and then we move into middle school, and we experience some broadening of that with teaming at 6th grade. And then in our district right now, then it goes to pretty much a junior high model, which is like mini high school. What we're trying to do is continue the expansion of that funnel so that our kids begin to move ever more toward a broader perspective. Part of that moving to a broader perspective is identifying those strands of academics you may wish to follow. There's a reason that some other countries do all their sorting at what would be for us 8th grade, that age time. That's when you're supposed to decide where you're going here and where you're going there. Trade school, university, whatever it may be. For us, in this country, we don't do it that way. What we do is we come up through this funnel when we're doing it the way we want to do it, and we help kids find those fits so that when they get to high school, they're ready to do that further expansion. So what I'm seeing with these electives is, yes, it deals with the study hall problem, which has just been egg cartoning for too many kids. And I know you're not going to say that, and that sounds really negative coming from me, but that's the way I see it. So we've got too much of that happening without the ability to pick up that slack and helping those kids really begin to focus in engaging effective, developmentally effective ways into the strands they want to pursue as they move forward. So I view them as technically electives, but specifically interest guiders and developers that you don't have in a junior high model. So the electives are key in my thinking around a middle school design. If I take all that philosophy away, though, what I'm left with is I got kids sitting in study hall. I have electives that aren't getting through the curriculum that they want to get through. I have the ability to plug that in, take care of those holes, and move kids along. Whether it leads to dyads, whatever it might lead to in teaming at 7th and 8th grade, isn't part of this ask. What this ask is for is to deal with elective offerings and the middle school instructional coach. That's what the FTE are listed for. What would then happen is that we'll reestablish the middle school redesign committee, and we had 60-some people on that. Reestablish that, and then consider how we deploy our existing staff, and then consider whether additional FTE may or may not be needed. Am I correct in that? We're looking at electives primarily.
For this next 2 years, yes.
Mhm. Okay. All that philosophy to get to that.
It's a chance, what's neat too is our students get to explore and experience at middle school when there's no constraints or worries about getting it wrong, right? Like when you get to high school, you're starting to earn credits and it's a higher stakes. And in middle school, it's an opportunity for them to really just explore and find out what they like and don't like.
And it also goes to the nationally researched fact that middle school is where substantial disengagement occurs. We lose kids all over this country and in this community as well at middle school when we cannot engage them in those ways.
What are some of the considerations that you're looking at with the possibility of adding a middle school executive director?
So in fairness to Ann, that's been a conversation since Scott Reeves was sitting in Ann's seat as we've talked about middle school expansion and providing more opportunity and oversight. So we plug that in as an opportunity in the future. That might come from reallocation of current staff changes in the district office, or it may come as an FTE request as part of the long-range staffing plan within the 5-year forecast as it stands now. So it's kind of a placeholder, but we're seeing, to Ann's credit and Scott's credit, they do a fabulous job leading that, but you're now going to 5 middle schools, 3 high schools, and high schools, although there are only 3 of them, are complicated small cities. We throw in the athletic piece, extracurricular, on the support of those principals and their development, same thing at the middle school. So we see opportunity down the line for considering adding more leadership at the district office to focus real clearly on our middle school, the implementation of middle school model along the way. So we wanted to make it clear that that's something we're looking at. It's not a request for any changes in the forecast. This would be, if we can work that in, we'd come back to you and share with you how we see that happening, but wanted you to know that that perspective was being discussed. Didn't want that to be a surprise later.
Okay.
Isn't that kind of what the instructional coach would be doing?
No, instructional coach is more about job-embedded PD, like our instructional coaches at the elementary level. An executive director would function like Ann does and Barb does. So now you'd have an executive director for elementary, executive director for middle, executive director for high school. And they all have the athletic piece, and all those pieces. So, you know, as you say, you also within, so underneath Ann's umbrella, when Scott was there, you also have the career centers, Global Scholars Program, the IB program. These are all parts of the work. And so we want to give the support to our principals and the programming more attention, and we think specializing that would be helpful. So it's something we're talking about and developing. I wanted to put it here again to share with you we're thinking about that, and we can have more conversations as we go, but we see that opportunity on the horizon, particularly given the magnitude of the work.
I have just one quick follow-up question to a financial piece, Dr. Callaghan, you touched on. So what's in, what Ms. Marshall has given us is basically if you take the sixth grade teaming model expenses and move them into seventh and eighth grade. By your estimation, is that on the more expensive end of what we might do someday? I mean, I can imagine you come up with really expensive things to do, but is that in the realm of possibility? Is that, you think, on the upper end? We don't know.
I would say that number would be based on the kind of concept we see at the sixth grade, which would be more at the upper end,
More the
right?
upper end.
That model. So I think there are other means of getting at teaming as a priority that might look different and might not be the same. And so really, you know, when you ask a team to start working on something, I'm big on dreaming and innovating and thinking about the possibilities, but you got to do that in a reality check, right? So we know there's financial constraints. That's what we're working with here. The financial constraints we see today may look different in a year. They may look better. They may look not as good. And so we need to be able to work with that team around those constraints to say, listen, what's in here now is not going to work well with the finances we have. So, you know, the probability of being able to move forward on that in that time frame may change. So do you want to hold on that until we can afford it, or do you want to look at other models that are more affordable within the resource we have today? And I think that's what we want to go to the table with the team. And so I don't want to cut them off and say, you can't do what you want to do, but we need to do that with the understanding that what we want to do may not fit the financial resources. So what's the next best thing? It's like anything we do in life, right? Got to make those, balance those two pieces. But that's where that redesign team comes into play that's done so much work, keeping in mind that everything we're talking about is something that already arose from a group of people, including parents and students and staff, who did a lot of work with Scott Reeves' leadership and some other people to say, this is the direction, and that included teaming at that time. So we need to honor that work and pick it back up again and move it forward. And even then, I think Scott would say the same thing. They understood that that modeling for teaming at 7th and 8th grade was a, in the future, placeholder. What would it look like as we build on it? And we just lost that opportunity. We just, you know, slipped through our hands, and now we want to grab hold of it again and see what that looks like. So, and I think to Dr. Nestor Baker's point, there's a clear ask in here about next year that we see as priority. We can talk about that from a financial. And then there's other parts of the middle school model. I would encourage the board, there's a link in there to the AMLE website. If you hadn't had a chance, when you have time, poke around, look at it, and see, because I think there's a lot in there that we can do for the middle school model beyond teaming that don't have those cost implications, like advisory period, like how we use the flex period, and all those components. There's a huge community service component to middle school education that is absent in our programming at this point. That could be part of that piece. Plug that into the flex period. Plug that into your portrait of a graduate. Plug that into whatever kind of teaming you might have. There's some great opportunities to take, I'm sorry, I'm on the soapbox, but great opportunities with our middle school kids for some investment in the next couple of years that's reasonable to really elevate that program and move it. Because the fall off that was mentioned about middle school engagement, it is clearly evident in our, so what we're doing now isn't doing a great job. Despite everybody's hard work, we think there's opportunity in front of us. We just got to do that in a financially reasonable way with what we know. Long-winded answer, but yes, that's probably an estimate of the most expensive. There's probably less expensive ways to do it and have some good outcomes.
Yeah, thanks. It's helpful both to know that that's probably on the more expensive end and to sort of understand the scope of ideas, you know, that we're willing to consider and that we're willing to sort of be creative about that. And I wouldn't want us to fall into that of thinking, oh, it's all this or it's nothing, right? So thanks for that.
Anybody else with this one? Okay. Moving on to technology, Paul Hopkins.
All right. President Davidson, members of the board, the ongoing conversation that we've been having with our teachers, our students and administrators about potentially increasing the access of technology for our students has been really, really exciting for us. Since presenting to the board, I've had the opportunity, as with Dr. Kellogg and others, to really meet with our teachers, meet with our administrators, our ed tech coaches, just to learn, to find out, what are some other things we might have missed? What are some things that you would really love through the advancement of technology? And also our students. I think it's really, really important that we, poll our students and honor their voice. The conversations have really demonstrated a need, and you're going to hear this kind of theme throughout the evening, is to kind of reconvene a team. And it was the Teaching and Roadmap Learning team. And we'd like to kind of pull them back together because they started a lot of this work a few years ago when one-to-one was kind of first introduced. And we want to get them back together and see what has changed. And we've learned a lot from COVID. We've learned a lot. Some of the teachers that were more reluctant to go through initially are now thirsting for technology because it is something that they found to be pivotal in their engagement of students throughout. And so what we'd like to do is get the team back together, if you will, and look at a lot of different things. And some of the things, and they're certainly not limited to, and we've talked about it a little bit, is looking at the success measures. Because when we introduce something as expensive and as important as technology, we want to make sure, are we achieving our desired outcomes? And what points do we need to be looking at? Maybe it's teacher engagement. Maybe it's the amount of time students are involved in Schoology. Different things like that we can identify and then have some data measures along the way to say, you know what, we're hitting these marks, or we need to adjust what we're doing. Policy considerations. I think Ms. Davidson brought it up, I think, at the last meeting, talking about, what is going to be the responsibility of our students, what will be the options for parents who may or may not want to go to a one-to-one, to make sure that we have everything in place so that everyone is very familiar and understanding what we have moving forward. And then also, mostly to me, it's our support for our teachers and our students, and that goes to professional development. One of the things that we were part of a few years ago was the Ohio Blended Collaborative, and it was a network of school districts in Central Ohio who were kind of dipping their toe, and this was about 5-7 years ago, into blended learning. And we developed some great networking. We identified some professional development opportunities, and we really want to make sure that if we are going to invest in the money for technology, we're also investing in our people, and we're making sure that they have the skills. And many of them have developed some phenomenal skills over the past couple of years. Some of the learning that they have developed through Schoology over the past couple of years is just amazing, and it's really aligned with our portrait of a graduate, but it's also aligned to that engagement factor. How are we getting our kids excited about learning along the way? So our current plan is to implement a grade 5 through 12 program, similar to what we brought to you at the last board meeting. But what we've heard is try to see if we can prioritize this launch, and to prioritize it in the grades 5 through 8 for some of the same reasons that Ms. Baldwin and others shared about the middle school experience. We believe by starting slow to go far, we can make a big difference. And one of the things with the middle school, with fifth graders, if we started with them, for example, they're in that one class and they get the opportunity to learn responsibility of technology and how to use it as a tool. And the teachers can learn how to use it as a tool. But middle school is also such a key, just opportunity, grade level for our students and our teachers to really dive into it, because a lot of our students at that grade level, as Dr. Nestor Baker was saying, especially at sixth grade, they're usually kind of homogeneous, and then they start to kind of funnel out a little bit along the way, but they still have that network of supports along the way. So we thought if we could start in the grade band and maybe start with, we've kind of played with some things, and this is what our roadmap team would help us identify, is what grade levels would it be best. We spoke to our 3 ed tech coaches, our teachers on special assignment, implement. It was Rachel Lacey, Drew Farrell, and Lane Halderman, and we asked them, of course, not surprisingly, they all advocated for their grade band to be the one to start with technology, but I thought Rachel Lacey put it best. She goes, you know, you can't go wrong wherever you start, because there is a thirst and there is a desire for increasing technology. So we want to pull this gang together, find out what's going to work best, and then implement it responsibly. I know Ms. Marshall was sharing some of that data there about what it would cost to do that 4 grades at one time and then do it. We're kind of willing to also look at exploring opportunities that maybe, again, start slow, identify potential pitfalls along the way, but if what I hear from our teachers and our students and our administrators is we're going to learn very quickly that this is something that everybody wants, and we'll learn how to handle those break-fix issues, how to handle, you know, responsibility issues for our students who are now going to be assigned a computer along the way. So hopefully I'm sharing that same excitement Ms. Baldwin was sharing about curriculum, about technology, because this is something that I really think has the opportunity to really move our district forward in the right direction. So happy to answer any questions you may have.
I have a question. I'm curious as to how much time our kids spend on computers right now, what we've seen in terms of how technology really has advanced learning. And I think about my own reading, just because my kids, like my son just said to me 2 days ago, Mom, I really do see how being on these things all the time impacts my mood. And I notice that too in my daughter. So I think about those things when I think about, us talking about more technology. And so I'm just curious as to, do we have the data showing us that it really is making improvements? Do we have any data showing us what it does to our children in terms of like mental health issues? And like, how are we taking all that into consideration?
I think those are great points, and that's what our ed tech coaches were saying. You know, we can pull the data to show over the past couple of years how much more often teachers are engaging in Schoology and students are engaging. But I think you bring up some great points, and that's kind of underneath that policy considerations to ensure that there's a responsible use of any device, whether it's a technology, the chalkboard, whatever, is that we're using it responsibly, because it is a tool. It is not the tool, and we don't want to get into, and that's what, when these data points, I think that's a great suggestion, is to look at how much time are kids doing, polling our students, polling our teachers and our parents to say, hey, you know, how much time are you using the device at home? And then try to track it with the research to say what's appropriate. You know, I can't sit up here right now and say the research says, you know, 3 hours, you know, of screen time or whatever is too much for a student after school. But those are the things that we want to measure, starting slow and seeing how it is, because you could go, you know, 0 to 100 very, very quickly, and every teacher feels like they've got to do a technology assignment, you know, every day. And that's not, you know, that's not the case. And that's part of that professional development too with our teachers, is to explain there are great opportunities with technology, but it doesn't replace great instruction in the classroom, and to identify areas where it could be a leverage point. Yeah. But yes,
Yeah.
no, those points are well-grounded, well-researched, and something that will be part of our evaluation along the way to ensure that we're not doing anything detrimental to students' well-being along the way.
Yeah, yes, thank you. I appreciate that.
So, among the lessons we learned during COVID was the ability and the flexibility and the creativity that our teachers show in a different application of technology than we had had pre-COVID. Because pre-COVID, in a lot of ways, there wasn't the sense of urgency that we all know we've dealt with. So as that has happened, and as I think about the costs that we look at for technology, a couple of things come to mind. One is a social cost and one is a financial cost. Do you anticipate any cost offsets from our traditional curricular materials? And we have made some changes over the past years, but are we looking at any tradition or any more curricular offsets to apply, if you will, to the technology budget?
Yes, potentially. We've seen a lot of our teachers in some of our, especially our high school courses, start to develop some resources and Schoology folders, if you will. So it's kind of diminished the need for some textbooks or regular updating of textbooks along the way. There will still be textbooks. There will still be need for, math manipulatives, some of the things in bridges, and all the other things that we use here. But I really see opportunities in some offsets along the way as teachers start to design their own courses and personalize it for the students in their classrooms.
Yeah, I see that not so much as a cost saver.
Right.
I'm not talking about that. I'm just, as we look at the amounts that we are beginning to explore around budgets for technology, and I look at where might we draw some other funds from. So that's what I'm looking at. I'm not looking at technology being a
Right.
cost saver.
No, right.
I'm not that kind of person. The other thing, when we talk about use of screen time and the need for professional development and all of those issues, I'm just going to lob this out there, and we don't even need to address it. Just take it and keep it in your back pocket for someday. Perhaps it is an opportunity for us to look a little more closely at our approach to homework.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well put, yes.
Just
Yes, no,
here
there's,
and-
yeah. That is an ongoing
Yes, it is.
discussion point
It is.
about the way, yes.
So while they're on there and feeling that pressure and all of those issues that go with too much screen time, we're also looking at those pressures exacerbated by the pressure on our children's time after school.
I guess just to follow up on that, and I've had conversations with a couple of you about this, I really appreciate seeing that you want to invest in people too and how we do this. We know that a lot of staff members, really made just heroic efforts with using technology during COVID and holding on to those pieces. So I think of two pieces here. I think I've sort of asked this before. So we learned lots of things during COVID, right? And I've asked about, how have we assessed, like, what did we learn? What pieces do we want to hold on to? What worked well? What didn't work well? So sort of wondering where we are in, looking at that sudden, rapid expansion of technology use during COVID.
And yes, and our roadmap committee is actually starting to pull together that data to start looking at, what have we learned, what worked well, because there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that, when I meet with students and talk to them and ask them about, technology and just different things that I get, but I realize that's not a strong data point. And so that's what we're going to try to do is pull some quantitative data, but also the qualitative data as well, to see what did we do well, what did teachers like, and what do teachers want more of along the way to ensure that we're meeting that mark and getting their voice.
That would be great, because I think one of the things that we hear is like, there were certain families that felt like, my child needs to do virtual academy, for example, but some kids really thrived there, some kids really struggled there. Like, what can we learn from that, right? For the kids who we know were online all the time. So that's one piece. And then the second piece that's sort of related to that, and I know I've discussed it with a couple of you, like I said, is really looking at how that technology is being used. And I go back to the homework issue, because I've got kids at middle school and high school, and we've had some robust conversations, I guess I'll put it that way, in my house about some online assignments where you kind of just get one chance, right? You go through, you pick your answers, you hit submit, and there it goes, you get a number back. And we need to build conversations about that. And some teachers are really far along the way in doing that, and some are coming along. But like, how can we make sure that those types of tools are being used appropriately, and giving the support to our teachers in terms of that, and in terms of like, which of those things really need to be graded? So I had a great conversation with Ms. Baldwin about grading. Right? What do we need to grade? Why do we grade the things that we do? And just thinking about homework in that context.
No, you're right. I'm moving from homework to grading. There's a lot of, conversations we can certainly have, and I love those types of conversations. But, and you gave that example of formative assessment, because I think a lot of our teachers are doing some pre-assessment along the way to kind of say, hey, here, I'm going to give you some 20 questions. Doesn't matter if you get them right or wrong. It just helps me identify where you are in your academic readiness to move forward with tomorrow's lecture or something like that. But sometimes students are like, well, I did it, and I didn't get any score. Was it counting? Was it, and so it's just helping, teachers, maybe just explain what the goal of this assessment is. And because a lot of times when I was teaching, it was, the assessment was for me as much as it was for your grade. And so I think that that's an opportunity to use, because some of the assessments online are phenomenal because they give teachers immediate real-time feedback that they can use to pivot that day maybe in their instruction. So
Maybe
yeah,
they
very
shouldn't
valuable.
be a grade, for example.
Exactly.
So when a
Yeah,
kid knows
it's
that.
not. It's
And
not-
sometimes they are getting used maybe that
Sure.
way, but
Yeah.
that's
And
part
just-
of the professional development piece.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Great point. Thank you.
Thanks.
So, starting in fifth grade, I'm assuming we started in fifth grade because we were doing a four-year refresh. Is that?
That's correct.
So was there any thought, because I hear you saying now you're focused on middle school, starting just fifth, sixth, seventh. We may have a year with a computer that could maybe be somewhere in the building, right? I guess I'm not sold on the starting in fifth grade.
Right. And there's opportunities there, and that's something that we'll be working with Mr. Dorn and our new IT director as well to really do a comprehensive inventory of all the computers we have and their lifespan in our carts. Because one of the things we want to see is if we did, for example, we did a 5, 6, 9, 10 initially because that would have a just more logical refresh timetable, if you will. If we did it this way, there's, like you say, there's going to be a couple of computers that might leave before their life cycle's done. And one of the things we are exploring right now, and we want to dig a little deeper, is to say maybe those can spend a couple extra years in the elementary carts so that they can be used. I mean, we're going to maximize the opportunity to ensure that the life cycle is honored along the way so that we're not wasting any lifespan of those computers.
But you're talking about doing this next year.
Correct. Yes.
So.
Yes.
What about, and I was reminded this from my husband, apparently there is something in Power School where it can say if you need a computer.
Correct.
Where are we at with surveying?
Yeah, we did some of that survey. The end size of respondents wasn't really strong to that particular question there, but we are using that. We used that to initially come up with the ECF computers, for example, those grant computers, to identify how many we needed. What we did is we found out that, they take that survey at the beginning of the year, and then quite often a lot of them will buy a computer or something along the way, and so that data is sometimes skewed a little bit to identify who truly needs one along the way. And we're looking at trying to identify who needs one at these grade levels, and then try to supply them with those computers, and then look at our inventory to see where else they can be.
Sure, that's my concern of
Yeah.
just investing in a number of computers, knowing that we have 10,000 computers now.
Exactly.
Right, we have
Yes.
10,000 computers,
at
but
various
yet
lifespans, yeah, and that's what we want to do, that inventory to really
But
find
I'm
out.
concerned that we're making this investment for next year when we don't know what we have. So that is one of my
Okay, please,
concerns.
please, yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, didn't mean to. I want to speak. We are looking at that. So we conservatively, that's a conservative number that you have in front of you. So what you're looking at is if we were trying to protect our 10,700 Chromebooks that we currently have in carts across the district outside of the ECF devices, that's what you'd be looking at. But what we're trying to do is to make a determination to be fairly more aggressive in terms of our approach to this, such a way that how many computers or how many Chromebooks do we need to have in carts at the middle school level to support middle school testing in the event that everybody forgets bring their Chromebook on testing day, right? So starting to utilize that data, be a little less conservative with warehousing them in the buildings versus putting them in a student's hands. So you're going to see, I think Dr. Nestor Baker asked about curriculum funds being spent differently. You're going to see Chromebook and device funds being spent maybe a little bit differently too in this regard. So I think you're looking at a very conservative number, one that has to be really, some more time has to be spent with them.
And that's my only thing. I want to do this, but I don't feel like we have all the information, and I'm also concerned, I'm just gonna say, I mean, I keep asking for the survey. We don't know what the need here is, we don't know what our families want, we don't know if our families want the responsibility or paying it back. I think that's really, really important as we invest. I understand that will fluctuate and change, but I think it would give us just an idea. I like the idea, starting at a little smaller band. I am very, very, very concerned, I cannot stress enough, the curriculum pieces that go with it. I think, and I'm just gonna say it, I think there's great pieces out there, and we hear about those great pieces, but I think a lot of the time, it's not being used for that. So I think the PD is so important. I don't think that's a day's worth of PD. I think that is a lot of PD. I think we have the staff in place to help with that PD. So I want to definitely validate that. I think they're out there. I think they're hungry for that. I don't know how to make that piece happen. So, yeah, those are just some of my ideas and then, or thoughts. And then, you know, we go back to that grant piece again, which brings me, what are we doing right now to make sure we can get those devices that I know can't be used for this into hands of people that need them?
What we have done is we have started to we've done the full round of, we started with middle school to high school to elementary. We're now, I've been asking our principals for some survey data on what can we do to maybe reach those that maybe missed it the first time around. What are some other ways to attract it? We're also looking at possibly, having some conversations of kind of flipping the expectation, especially at our high school level, because right now a lot of our teachers are, rightfully so, believe that, hey, I can't really assign a lot of work at home because the students may not have a computer at home. Well, we may flip that expectation a little bit to say, you know what, we've gone, to you, we've asked if you needed a computer, if you needed a Wi-Fi hotspot, and maybe flip that around a little bit so that, the expectation is going to be from your teachers that you might be asked to do some work at home, and so therefore, do you need a computer? And if so, we have some opportunities to provide that. And that may be the, I want to say jolt or something to make sure that people understand that, we do have access to some of these computers that they may otherwise have not selected the first time around to do that.
The other piece of this is, so the numbers, correct, there's a hair over, some number over 10,000 specific devices and carts in the building. There's 15,000 students. So whether or not they take them home, our current goal on the roadmap was 2 students per device was the original goal. And we got to a little bit better than that. So right now what we have is teachers in classrooms who want access to device, and we can talk about the professional development and the appropriate use, but what we know right now is teachers are struggling to feel that they have enough access in their classroom for kids in the room because we're not at a 1-to-1. And so a model of improving on that ratio, whether or not that's taken home or handed to the student, but investing in more technology so there is more access in school for use for teachers to alleviate that. That's what we're hearing. I actually met with Ben Hartnell this week, who sent me an email. I'm frustrated because in his classroom he's feeling under-resourced in that place, and he has tried to reach out and do multiple things. As we talked to Drew and Lane and Rachel, they talked a lot about this issue, and so there's this interesting fulcrum point around, I'm only going to go this far because I don't have enough of what I need. If I had more, I could go further. I had all this before and access. I don't have that now. So, and I think that's part of the roadmap team's piece, is to grab those questions and bring them forward to get that information as part of the drive. But what we're looking for here is, are we committed to try and increase the amount of technology we have available to our teachers in the classrooms and our kids? Where we go with that, taking home, not taking home, are policy questions we can work through. But I think that's where we're looking for is affirmation that we are interested in that as a district of improving on the amount of available technology for our students and our staff. That's what we're looking at.
Any other feedback on this?
Just one quick question about elementary and devices, because we've talked a lot about middle and high school. So I would, excuse me, just like to understand better, if we feel like the need at elementary, you know, with the carts being in classes, is meeting the need better at that level, and that's, you know, why we're not talking about it as much. I'm making an assumption that's true, and I would just like to hear about that.
Yes, you know, in our conversations, and Barb, if you want to add anything to it, is in speaking to the teachers, especially at almost the pre-K up to grades 4 and 5, is that, you know, they would love to have more access to computers, but would love the cart idea of having those available to them.
Anybody else? Okay, before we have all-day kindergarten. I almost switched. Sorry. Barb Wallace.
When we met a few weeks ago, we talked about the fact that we're in a really good spot with our all-day kindergarten. Since then, we are working on filling all the spots. We are at that really busy time where we have sent out letters, we're getting responses back, and how we're really now in a good spot to just wait and see next year how we recover from the effects of COVID and where we land, and maybe even do a following year that way. And in the meantime, what we will do as a district is develop monitoring metrics to be reviewed annually that we will report out to you based on the demand that we see for need for all-day kindergarten. We can look at our tuition, keep it as is, constantly monitor whether you want to go somewhere else with that, and look at the enrollment patterns to see where people are coming from. While we are doing that, develop a plan for how much it would cost to do 100% all day, should you be choosing to move that way in the 4 or 5 years out, and look at if you want to maintain tuition as is, or at some point change tuition before you reach that point. So at this point, we will report out annually where we are on demand, on tuition, and where it stands, and then just have conversation where you want to see it go.
Any questions?
It makes my heart sing, program monitoring metrics, so thank you. I'm underlining it. Yeah, thanks.
I just want to say it's,
I'm sorry.
I'm
Go ahead.
sorry, go
No,
ahead.
go ahead.
I just want to say I think it's a thoughtful process, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
I am all in favor of looking at ways that we can examine tuition and what those levels may be and what we might be able to do with those. It makes sense to me for families. It also makes sense to me when I look at our peer districts.
Bob, anything? I'm good. I'm going to do a quick summary then. So we started off with Nicole. We know what's in the forecast. If we have final questions as we plug these in, it looks like for magnets, I'm looking at impact here, it would be 1 to 2 FTE. If my count is off, grab me. I'm just going to go starting next year, okay? So 1 to 2 next year. Student mental health and wellness, looks like 2 for next year, and then 1 would be ESSER funds.
I think that's 2 FTE in '24. One more year.
So none next year.
Correct.
Oh, we love that. All right. Mark that off, helpful. 7 for middle school redesign, and then a coach that we potentially could use ESSER funds. Are we pretty confident with that? Okay. We didn't really talk about 1 for technology. Do we want to, that wasn't, do you want to mention anything in there, or was that?
No, the amount that Ms. Marshall gives to you was kind of that 4, so, you know, that would be the, the worst-case scenario, the highest cost there. But to kind of follow along with what Dr. Nancy Nestor Baker said, there's opportunities for ESSER funds potentially for these devices too, the first couple of years as well.
So the .5 FTE that is listed for fiscal year '23, could we pick that up with ESSER funds? I've spent ESSER over and
That
over.
would be more challenging.
You and a lot of other people.
That's a
We would
hand
have
in hand
to-
with the expansion of the amount of technology we put in.
Right.
Okay.
Right? So if we don't go down that path next year, then we would probably delay the implementation of
Like
that.
that, but
I think what we're looking at is, from hearing from the board, you want more information, because this is a budget consideration,
Right.
right? Are we going to ask for an increased allocation for technology for next year to move us more to changing the ratio of students to devices, right? So I think that's what Scott Dorn and Paul and our new Tim, boy, last name's slipping my mind. Stifler, thank you. We want to review that, because we already have built into the forecast and in our budget refresh dollars that maybe help to offset any program change for next year. So we want to develop that concept, bring forward in the coming weeks forward a more concrete plan to the board for them to see how we would recommend doing that. So that'd be part of that process, if that makes sense. But the FTE would be tied to that.
So we're looking at 9. And we know that Nicole is pretty frugal. I'm teasing you, I'm sorry. Share your thoughts with us as we, so I'm looking at middle school and it looks like 2 for magnet, 1 to 2 for magnet is what we're left
So
with.
2 for magnet plus middle school is, because 1 is coming out of the ESSER funds. Okay, I see where you're doing.
So that puts us over.
Yeah, so, I mean, you have the spreadsheet, and like I said, what's in the forecast isn't defined now, right? So there is opportunity there. We also have the 20%, so our ESSER 3 grant fund it's $21 million, which is a lot of money. 20% of that, it's about $4.2 million, has to be spent on learning loss per the grant requirements. And we're in the planning stages for that, but it's difficult to spend that amount of money without adding staff. So as we were all sitting here talking and thinking, I was thinking, is that something we could potentially pay for the middle school FTE out of those ESSER dollars, which only run to 24, like that has to be spent by 24, in which case we will open the new middle school at that time. And we're going through the staffing plan for opening the new middle school, so we have an allocation in the forecast. And so I've always said, we estimated what's in the forecast for the new schools back when we passed the bond issue in 2019, and that there's opportunities for there to be potential savings based on the placeholders we have in the forecast, right? Once we actually look at the staff we have, how many students we have, where we're going to allocate the students through the redistricting process. And so there could potentially be an opportunity for that to come in better than where we are projecting currently. I do think the elementary school has come in much lower than where we were projecting, so there was opportunities for savings there, that we could potentially have room to put the 7 FTE for the electives and just carry it in the ESSER funds until that time. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I literally was just thinking about that when we were sitting here talking. So,
Makes total sense to me, because basically what it does, it lets us move ahead with what we're trying to do while delaying the impact on our local funds, so.
right, but what I want to be careful about is I don't want to impact, because we do have, we are paying for our student success coaches this year out of some of that funding. We still have ESSER 2 that we're finishing up spending, so we're paying for our Summer Ignite program. So I think we need to sit down and look at, does that make sense? Is there room there when we're talking about using the ESSER funds to kind of float that until we go through the staffing. Now, if we go through the middle school staffing plan, it's like, oh, wait, we need much more than what we anticipated, then that could be a problem for us in the future, right?
Mhm.
So I think I would need time to evaluate that. Yes, please.
So when you look at the possible efficiencies from our elementary school opening and middle school opening, they're still just possibilities at this point until they come into fruition when the building's actually open. So as we went through realignment for elementary school, for example, as we went through realignment, we realized there are a lot of teachers outside of Hawthorne and Mark Twain, where we knew these large groups of students were leaving due to diminished enrollment in a particular grade level in their particular building. We've realized those efficiencies also at Minerva France. So they've contributed to the staffing at Minerva France, which has allowed us some efficiencies in terms of what the original ask was for. But we're also looking at, okay, we're getting ready to see where we have bubbles. So what's the bubble look like at this particular building or that particular building? So those efficiencies that are, while they're there today, may not be there in May. And so we have to be really cautious about that, especially so early in the middle school staffing plan. It seems like it should be a little more seamless at the middle school because so many large groups of students are leaving. But the reality is the same thing that we're looking at right now with our middle school electives and some of our teachers who are in building A in the morning and building B in the afternoon. We see that again. We could see that again when we move these large groups of students, where we can't move the whole teacher, the whole FTE. So we've got to be able to make sure that we don't, I'm going to take a line from Mrs. Marshall here and spend it early. We got to keep it. We've got to make sure we maintain it in the event that that's going to be. So we can't say, well, we're looking 7 better this year than we thought we would be for middle school, so let's spend that right now on middle school staffing.
Right.
Because that might not be the case until
Right.
we realize the reality of all the students moving and how the staffing works.
So this is the conversation we've been having for weeks on the long-range staffing plan and how do we align. So we have the allocated FTE for growth that Nicole mentions, the 5 and the additional. Then there's the allocation for the new elementary school. So really, the amount of money that was forecasted for staffing for this year includes all of that, times a number that's an average. So that really leads to an amount of money. So in the end, as we start plugging in projected FTE and salaries, we start to measure that against what was in there, right? And that's what we've been working with to reconcile the requests to what the actual dollar amount is for FY23, to balance those two things to make them align. And as Mark helps and Nicole and the whole team, really as we look at FY23 right now, with what we know today, we're a hair over with opportunities for aligning those two and not putting ourselves exceeding what we had in the forecast. So it can become an opportunity for more cost savings to the forecast. And so we're working on that. I think what we can do for the board is over these next several weeks as we get more and more closer, we can continue to come back and share with you where we are on that staffing plan for next year and how these requests fit in there, what that would mean, the implications are for FY23. And then it's really reinvigorating the same idea in FY24 as we talk about the things we want to do. So in FY24, let's take the magnets again, and what I think I heard was this idea of, can we go faster, right? So in FY24, as we're building out the middle school, if we're experiencing similar efficiencies, we may discover we have an opportunity to go faster with the magnets next year. Rather than going 1, 1, 1, we may be able to go 2. Even the 2 we have this year, really dependent upon what we're playing with right now in that long-range staffing plan and the money that's in there. So the other side of the staffing piece is, that's the money available for staffing next year. There's also realized savings from retirements and rehires that we always work on too. So this is all of the sausage making that goes on that we do to make sure everything fits within the financial picture that we want for the district and for our community full board. And so that's the evolution of things that will come as we look at these things this year and in the future, if that makes sense.
So,
And Just real quick, you said something and I just wanted to clarify. So the savings from retirements and changeover and things like that, that's also already estimated in the forecast. So when we look at the dollar amount that's compared to the staffing plan, that's the dollar amount, right? So I just want to make sure that's clear.
So I want to hear everyone's thoughts on the proposed FTE for next year. I don't- How we feel about it. Because you're going to have some sort of answer tonight in order to move forward for planning. So we've got scheduling in middle school coming up, because that'll impact the schedule, right? Yeah. Anyone want to share?
Well, I mean, I think one of the questions, the idea of ESSER funds and how we're using them, right? I'm really interested to hear when they go and look at that, where we really are in sort of, you know, I don't think we've already spent it 2 times over yet, but I just want to make sure. But I think the middle school investments are so important that if we can float that with ESSER for 2 years, boy, that's really important. It feels really important to me to start to build out middle school again. And then, you know, I feel like the magnet program expansion, like I've already publicly committed to making that happen.
Okay. I would just echo what Jen said. It gives me pause thinking about in 2 years, then what? And so I'd be really interested in seeing, I don't know what magic you can work to show us what that could look like, but I think that I am very supportive of both. I've said I'm supportive of the magnet. I'm supportive of the middle school electives. I've seen how my own children get excited about that. And I think it's really a good way to help kids figure out where to focus. I just have pause on what then in 2 years.
Based off of our discussions and what I have to look at tonight, to go off of, I am comfortable with making these commitments to the FTE for the middle school redesign and for the expansion of the magnet programs. If we can use some ESSER funds, I think that's a positive, that's a plus. But there is a certain, and for me, I've just kind of gotten comfortable with being uncomfortable with how we're able to project in terms of the budget in the 5-year forecast, because there is so much uncertainty around it. And I think it will be different for different people, because it's just how we tolerate risk. And so I think it has to do with our risk tolerance. And so I believe that these are moves I believe we need to make to help us continue to move forward in advance. So I'm comfortable, but I also understand there may be a lot of other people that are not. I wish I had a crystal ball that could show me what the people down on Broad and High were going to do, so we would be able to know what our budget was going to look like for sure in a couple years. But I don't. But I'm comfortable with it, and if we need to make adjustment, I'm all but positive we're going to have to make some kind of adjustments 2 years from now. But I'm good with it. That's a long way of saying I'm comfortable with it.
So I echo what Vaughn said, and my reasoning is this. When I calculate my tolerance for risk for the FTE that are listed here, there are certain things that come into play. One is what level of ESSER funds we can use doesn't mean anything other than the fact that it reduces the coming impact. So rather than starting an expense now and having that increase over time and, reduce other funds elsewhere, we avoid that for a couple of years for at least some of what we're talking about. That's a big deal to me because it reduces and extends the impact on our bottom line. So that's a big one for me. Another is looking at the realities of our staffing plan, and yes, things could go in other directions. But as I look at our staffing plan, as I look at the FTE that are currently in the budget for not only the new schools, but also the typical increase in numbers that we have, the 5 and the 1.5 for classified, that gives me awareness and capacity for flex as we go forward as well. And we build forecasts like that. We also build our forecasts intentionally conservatively, and I'm glad we do, and I want us to continue doing that. What that often, not always, but often means for us is that at the end of the year, we're in a better position financially than we thought we were going to be when we forecasted at the beginning of the year. So I'm also looking at the historic trends on our budget. What do our expenditure patterns typically look like? What do our FTE usages typically look like? What are we looking at as regards ESSER fund usage? And all of that then suggests to me that the risk is calculated and not in any way Vegas style. So that's why I am in favor of it. I'm also in favor of it because there's another component of risk that I have been weighing extensively, particularly since the word of the Intel plant came out. As the Intel plant comes online, it will change all of us. Every district, every community in this area will change because of Intel, because of the people who come in, because of the educational needs and pressures that will arise for the workforce that's needed. It will change in a myriad of ways. And as I look at those myriad changes, a risk that I am looking at for this school district is, what do we need to do and how far are we willing to go to do it to make sure that we are, to use your words, Tracy, a destination district as the population changes and the needs change. And I look at our peer districts and I look at other districts as well. I want to make sure that we position ourselves so that we are where we should be as Westerville City Schools. So all of that goes to where Vaughn landed, and that I am in favor of the FTE as listed.
Okay, and I thought we were done asking questions, but I have one more question, I'm sorry. Mark? I know, but as we look at the forecast and your chopping ability and sustainability, going down the line, when we're talking about this, I want you to weigh in. I want you to, and I know you'll be honest, but like, if it's something hard we need to hear, then it's something hard we need to hear.
And this group will tell you more than anybody, I'm always anxious in terms of how much we grow at one time. I think Nicole and I have worked a lot on this and have looked at this forecast a lot. I think ESSER has an impact and plays a little different role than what we're used to. I think we still need to evaluate a lot of this on probably more than a regular basis. And if the board, I hear the board saying, let's move ahead cautiously with these items. I think it will be important for this. I mean, we're talking FY '23 and FY '24. There's also 25, 26, and 27 that Nicole's already looking at. So a lot of those years will probably be without me, but I think it's important for this group to understand. I think the biggest learning component that I've had over in my time here, we can build and build and build, okay? We can put things in place. We can create the greatest everything. One levy failure is more detrimental than the benefits of everything we've built. So I'm always cautious. But I just think it's important for people to keep that perspective. We can build, but it has to be cautious.
So my thoughts, completely agree with the middle school. There's definitely, I think that would be my first priority of doing something there. I'm super excited that we can have a coach through ESSER funds, but I think that is definitely important. As we look at magnets, I would be okay just adding first grade. Now, if we're going to have a trigger elsewhere where we have a bubble and we would have to add FTE somewhere else, then I would say that would make sense to go ahead and add that second grade to a magnet program. But I think that it would save something, right? Like, I'm a little concerned too about the ESSER funds, spending them and then 2 years out. I mean, I'm just thinking how I budget, like if you would buy something knowing it's going to come due, you still sock that money away, right, and gain interest, right? So you can pay it off. So, I know, not here. I'm saying what I do. I'm saying what I do. So it makes me nervous. I know you do a great job with placeholding, but that does make me nervous, especially when it comes to staffing.
Yeah, so I hear you, and like, it was just a thought that popped into my head as we were, and I normally don't say those things out loud, but I did, so it's out there. But what I'm basing it on is we've gone through the elementary staffing plan, and there's significant savings from what we had in the forecast with where we landed with the staffing plan for the elementary school, right? And I know Scott Dorn's already done a lot of work on the middle school piece, and we're not there yet, so lots of things could change between now and then. But I do think that there is some potential, and like John said, we have a staffing plan. Like, these are just pieces, right? There's a whole staffing plan outside of this that we're evaluating. So I do think that, I just think that there might be some potential there.
Okay, so I hear you're comfortable.
Yes, I would
Okay.
not have said it out loud if I wasn't.
Okay. Okay. So, John, do you feel like you understand where we're at?
I think the whole team understands where we're all collectively at,
Okay,
which is we want to try and do as much good for kids as we can without putting ourselves in a position where we lose community support in the future. And I don't think there's a person sitting at this table. Now, Mark, and his timeline, he's a cost savings in the future for us. But in terms of his timelines for remaining in work. But we talk about this a lot. Like, where's our threshold as a team for being in front of the community saying, now we need more, and we have to come now, and it's this big. And we all have a collective understanding of what we think this community is willing to support in terms of any kind of ask and when. But we also think that by adding value and improving the experience that people have, that ask in the future, if it's timely and appropriate, is generally viewed more receptively by community. So you have this balancing act between not doing enough to make ourselves a value asset and doing too much that you fall off the financial cliff. So those are our wrestling matches often. In fact, there was one last week. We had a good Brene Brown rumble. And effectively, it modified a lot of what we're talking about here. So what I hear is, we want to try and do as much good for our kids as we can, expand the opportunities we can, but we need to do that in a balanced approach, knowing the finances we have. We have some granular pieces now we can work on that I think our team understands, and I think collectively, as a governance team and this executive team, I think we all have a good understanding of where we're at, and we can move this forward.
Okay, could you give us some specifics so we make sure we're on the same page as far as?
So what I heard tonight is the following. I'm going to go through each one. We want to move forward with the magnet school expansion with at least the one FTE that we have in there. And that's already being, has already been plugged into our long-range staffing plan, so we understand that finances. What we need behind that more is the details as we talk to our teachers about how we work that communication with our families moving forward. And that's on that to-do list if you look on that outline. What I heard on student mental health and wellness is like the approach, makes good sense, the timing of it is a good opportunity. And we are already building that into our long-range staffing plan as we move along. So we know what's in the forecast. So we're always looking 3, 4, 5 years down the line, that staffing plan against those other things. So we see that piece, the ESSER part for next year as well. Middle school redesign, I hear from the board. We see the need to invest in those electives and in that coach. We think there's value there. We want to see how we can do that financially, the most beneficial way we can do that financially moving forward. So we need to continue to develop that as a team. What would be the impact to ESSER funds? How does it look in the long-range staffing plan? And work with you on that before we pull the trigger and start posting and hiring. It's kind of the way I heard it. Is that fit right? Okay. And then the middle school redesign team, we'll continue having conversations with that as we go along and see what the impacts are. Technology, lots of questions in there. I think what we need to do, and it's part of that to-do list, is we need to go back, work with our IT folks, look at our current allocation, look at our refresh budget, look at the available devices, and bring forward to the board a more concrete plan of what would that look like at what grade levels, what would that cost be, what's the sustainability, and what are we going to learn from that? That going at a magnitude of trying to do 4 grade levels in 1 year, none of us think that that's a good idea. We're not going to hand out 4 grade levels with the computers for kids to take home on day 1 of next year, right? We'll work on that and bring some more back on the technology piece. That's another one that has some ESSER implications we can look at too. Making that fit within the finances. The all-day kindergarten word is, we're pleased with the expansion we have. It's a great expansion. You know, we go from like, I don't know, 40% to 70-something%. The demand is high, it's good. Back in home schools. To the question about Longfellow, yes, we close as an all-day kindergarten, but those 4 classrooms are part of the plan, and we go from where we're at with all-day kindergarten Longfellow to an increase that's almost double. So there's good in there. How we use Longfellow, understand that piece, so we'll look at that. So what we know is, let's keep an eye on that, right? Let's program monitor that, see what's going with demand, and where that might fit in the future for us with our community. So no financial implications on that at this point. We want to look at that further down the line. I think the priorities down the line are going to be, we're going to have to deal with that as a board, as a community, is where do we go first? Is it, you know, this is a chicken egg. Do we look at tuition first, or do we look at expansion first? Or do we couple that together? That's a can down the road item for us, is what I've kind of heard. So, Mona, how'd I do?
Great, that's what I heard from my colleagues.
Awesome. So we know our homework,
Okay.
right?
Which, that takes us to transportation.
Thank you, President Davidson. If you recall, in October, we discussed the need to move to include a 4th tier in our transportation run strategy. This need is based on staffing levels and service level efficiencies. Every family in our district this year has been affected in some way by transportation staffing levels. This year, despite our drivers' strong efforts, I mean, they've been some strong efforts by our drivers to cover open routes on a daily basis. They're doing a remarkable job. There's just not enough of them available at certain times of the day, depending upon which routes need covered on a particular day. We have, in fact, hired about 15 new drivers this year. And currently we have about 10 subs that are available to us on a given day. And although we still have issues as we did today, this is an improvement over the scenarios we faced in November through January, which is why they are occurring less frequently. The impact of who is available to cover determines our strategies to keep kids in school to the greatest extent possible. But the reality is, we've probably had, I think Bob Lind, who's our Director of Purchasing and Logistics, indicated today that we've had probably one in the last 19 years with an adequate level of sub-coverage. We're just, based on the scenario, we're seeing it more extensively, just like we are in every other aspect of our world. So the fourth tier will help us improve our situation, but we'll still need to increase our staffing levels to become more efficient, and here's how. With the fourth tier, we have, without the fourth tier, we have 98 resources as our maximum number of resources on the road during our elementary school tier. So at one time, we've got 98 of our resources. A fourth tier allows the elementary tier to be broken into two separate tiers with then 40 to 50 resources per tier. The order of the tiers also has implications as to how many resources are gained as an efficiency. So when the announcement of the fourth tier was made in October, the board also asked us to take a look at later high school start time as part of the process, and that was considered in looking at the various models of the tiers as well. So we've looked at 3 versions of tier models, but I want to make sure you understand, because I'll keep talking about high school, middle school, and elementary school, that we also have a large group of resources tied to career centers, St. Paul, and other non-publics, for which we must schedule in conjunction with one of our tiers or around multiple tiers. So we looked at a high school, middle school, and then breaking the elementary into 2-tier model, which is essentially our current model, just breaking the elementaries up. We also looked at starting with middle school, then going to high school, and then the 2 elementary school tiers, and we looked at beginning the day with elementary school, both tiers, and then high school and middle school. From these concepts, we developed some guiding questions for stakeholders, our families and our staff, to get a better understanding of their tolerances regarding potential changes in the school days for families and the work days for staff. We had 4,000 family responses, just over 1,500 from elementary school, just over 1,000 from the middle school, and almost 1,400 from our high schools, and 897 staff members, including just over 600 teachers and 67 WESET members. So here's what we learned. The elementary school, beginning the day, had the greatest value in staffing efficiencies, reducing our maximum number of resources on the road from 98 to 78 at its peak time. However, that model creates the greatest amount of change and would affect every family and staff member in our district. It would also require a 7:30 a.m. start for elementary school. These changes seem to be outside of both families' and staff's tolerance levels, just based on the way that would have to fall. The next model that we looked at would be middle school, high school, and then the 2 elementary school tiers. It was able to reduce our maximum number of resources on the road at one time from 98 to 90 at the high peak, which allows for more transition time between tiers for our buses. That allows them to be more on time. It's hard to say that we're not always on time, but we're not always on time. So increasing the time between the tiers allows us to be more on time, but it also allows more drivers to cover routes as needed on a daily basis. When somebody's out, it gives them a greater opportunity to fill in. It will reduce our doublebacks and, more importantly, our delayed doublebacks. And it would also greatly allow us to reduce, if not eliminate, the need for an elementary school delay in the morning, and also reduce secondary early releases. So in other words, this model would help us provide better service levels. However, it comes with issues that need to be studied further, with resolution strategies to be developed, such as what about the Career Center? And what about middle school after-school supervision? So just from a Career Center standpoint, if we changed our high school and middle school start times, because I know this was a popular response and parent response in their feedback, by sliding our day against the existing Career Center day at Delaware Area Career Center, we would be adding an extra academic period in the district for our juniors, but losing an academic period for our seniors. So it creates some challenges there that need some time to be worked out. In other words, we've got to have a plan to make sure those kids are afforded all the opportunities that they need to earn all the credits that they need and still be able to participate in a program that they really, really like. So the final model, let me say one more thing about the middle school, high school, elementary tier. We could further reduce our resources, our maximum resources, from 98 all the way down to 81 if we push the elementary tiers out just a few more minutes, but it would require a 4:15 end time for our elementary schools, which also seems to be borderline on our tolerance levels from a parent and staffing standpoint. So while it's possible, probably not the direction that we would go. The final model that we did look at, that I'd like to discuss here is essentially our existing model. We start right now with high school, then we move to middle, and then the 2 elementaries. We are able to reduce the number of maximum resources from 98 to 93. So we're only saving about 5 resources in this model. And the greatest number of resources then, if you can understand our current conflict, right now it's with elementary schools, 98 at one time. These 95 or 93 would not be with high school or with elementary schools anymore. It's the high school, middle school, St. Paul Career Center, non-publics, all at the same time overlapping. So that's the challenge and why this only gives us 5 resources in the efficiency. But just as in the same as the middle school, high school model, the high school, middle school model also gives us the same opportunities to expand the time between the tiers and be better in all those same ways that we talked about before. It's just a fewer resources at our peak time. This model appears to fall into most families and staff tolerances, but with some concern for the second elementary school tier, that school day will end at 4 o'clock in this model. But overall, it fits with the others well. So given that there's strong consideration for flipping our high school and middle school tiers, because we hear that a lot, and you'll see it, you would see it in the responses from our parents, there are some additional barriers and concerns that still need to be explored. We're not ready to do that and make that decision right now, and we have to make a decision right now or we won't be scheduled for next year. So what we will continue to do is we're going to move in that high school, middle school, elementary tier model. The second elementary school tier will finish at 4 p.m. The high school will still start at 7:25. There'll be a little bit of nuances throughout the day, but it's essentially where we are right now. But we're going to convene, again, we're going to get people together to talk more about the middle and high school because it is a really popular concept. But like I said, there are some, it's not just Career Center. There are other things that have to be worked out. That's just a great example to share with people to help them understand the issues. So one of the last things that we're going to need to do is split the elementaries into their 2 tiers. That's something that we'll be working on this week. And we did get some feedback from parents about their tolerance levels, and actually some buildings look like they would prefer to be on the second tier, others in the first. So we've got to follow up with that a little bit further before we make our final decisions. But that's where we are, and spring break, we start routing for next school year. Any questions?
What would that, excuse me, what would that second elementary start time be then? You mentioned the end time.
Give me just a second here.
Yeah. Thanks.
Are you on the third? 9:20. I'm sorry, 9:35.
9:35?
9:35.
Okay. And I don't remember, but right now some of our schools, like our magnet schools, are starting a little bit later, right? So what's their start time now?
So our magnets, it varies because the transportation drops off. So 9:05 is it's 5 minutes later for Longfellow, then 10 minutes for Hamby, and then 15 minutes for Emerson. So as they traverse through, so it's about, so if I can just group them all into Emerson, it's 15 minutes later than our normal. And so this actually is only about 15 minutes later than that at this point. So it's not that big of it won't be that big of a swing if magnets fall in that tier.
Okay, thank you. So I was wondering.
With splitting the elementaries into the two tiers. Is the thought that the way we develop those two tiers now is the way they will continue into the future? Or is that something that will change from year to year based on parent preference? Because I'm thinking in my head, okay, so there might be a group of parents that's at Alcott right now, and they're like, hey, we want the early slot. But 5 years from now, you know, the parents may say, no, we want the late slot.
Yes, so no, it won't happen like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to assign tiers this year, but there is a potential for change next year. So here's how it works. The largest elementary school tier is tied to the middle school tier because it's the greater number of resources for middle school than high school in terms of number of resources on the road at a given time. So when the middle school run happens, those are predominantly going to be the drivers who come back for the elementary first tier if they move up first. So the tiering will have a little bit to do with based on where we settle next year. So we'll establish something for this year. There is the possibility that a change may occur next year, but it's not going to be wholesale, and it's certainly not going to be up for a vote.
Okay. That's good to know. It's good for our community to know.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you for your work on that. Anybody else want to share anything for the group? Okay. Thank you all for coming tonight and sharing with us. We really appreciate it. 6.1, the board will meet in regular session on Monday, April 11th, 2022 at 6 p.m. here at the Early Learning Center. And with that, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. We're adjourned.
46.